Welcome to the podcast that's dedicated to making you a faster cyclist, the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast presented by Trainer Road. I'm Coach Jonathan Lee, and we do not have our normal guest with us today.
We're all messed up.
We have product manager and Cliff Bar Racing's Pete Morris.
How's it going, guys?
And we also have another product manager and Cannondale Racing's Amber Pierce.
Hello.
Nate is at Disneyland right now. He's actually probably going to be listening to this and jumping in. He already jumped into the dock that we have that we kind of go off of. I see that he's changed some things, so we'll probably get him jumping in. Maybe he'll be in the live chat on YouTube. And then Coach Chad is taking a hiatus this week too, so we're going to take it for him. It's going to be pretty good.
Yeah.
A first point of business to cover today. And it did say this was an opportunity to roast Nate, but I think he jumped in here because it now says opportunity to say nice things about our dear leader.
Which are pretty much the same.
Yeah, same thing. Same thing. And it's not that, I'm sure other people feel probably similarly to this too. It's a good opportunity to do it. But first things first, and we don't have anything terrible to say to Nate, so sorry to disappoint you all. No drama. But Nate did enter the Dirty Kansas lottery.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think you'll do?
We were laughing about it in the kitchen not 15 minutes ago. I was talking to someone who will remain nameless because I value everything about him.
Yeah.
He said that Kansas wrecked him for 3 years.
Ooh.
So, I think it's hard.
Yeah.
That's what I got out of that.
think
It's
it's
really
hard?
hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I think it's one of those races where most people focus on the physical preparation, the training around it, but I really think the hardest part about that race, it really comes down to logistics and mental fortitude. And those are, honestly, I talked to a lot of people before I raced it who had raced it before, and they all said the same thing. Like, there's no way to mentally prepare for this. And then once you've done it, you know what you're in store for, but that part I think is really hard. So I don't know. I think Nate could do pretty well with this.
Those are honestly two of his strengths.
Yeah,
I was just going to say, yeah.
Like managing a complex operation. Right?
Yes, perfect. Check.
Check.
Mental fortitude. Check.
Yeah.
Nate does a really good job of like going into a race and basically knowing what he can do and what he needs to do to fulfill that, right?
Yeah.
Whereas I think a lot of people, for a lot of us, when we go into races, a lot of the time we kind of build up this fairy tale like success, but then we let a lot of self-doubt creep in. So we just sit kind of in the middle and we just say, I hope I'm going to have a good day. Like, I bet Nate also thinks, I hope I'm going to have a good day when he goes into races. But at the same time, Nate, I feel, more than most riders, says, this is how I'm going to do. Because he is so, very process-driven and has, like, everything laid out and drawn out.
Yeah,
so,
everything's been regimented up to that point, and it's just another, like, little check to do.
Right. So product manager Brandon Need, super fast climber guy, we were just talking before this podcast, and he brought up, do you remember how wrecked Nate was after Leadville? And my response to that was, don't worry, this is just twice as long. So, but honestly,
that means you get to go slower.
Yes, you do get to go slower, and the speed isn't what killed him at Leadville. And I say killed him, like really, he was in a bad place from that one. Bad dehydration and not eating enough, and he came across the line and was not in a good place.
His backpack was warm.
Yeah, that's exactly why he threw it. So it's too hot.
Yes.
So I bet he's losing his mind if he's listening to this right now. But so if he nails the nutrition, then we're good. So I feel like just from reading different race reports from that, talking to Jeff Kabush about his performance, which I know he's on a different level, but the principles very much are like the same.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like the two main things about Kansas that determine the success of your day, assuming that you've had good training going into it.
And not to skip over, Nate's physiological profile lends itself pretty well to Kansas.
It does.
Yeah.
So
he's also a bigger rider, higher threshold. So if you think about like the rising tide of wattage that's taken away from you from gravel, because everyone's riding on the same surface. Let's say it takes 30 watts out of everybody. Well, 30 watts to Nate's threshold versus somebody like me, that's not as big of a deal for Nate because he has a bigger threshold, bigger person, that sort of thing. But I feel like it comes down to two main things, and that's number one is pacing. It's and because no matter how fast you are, you can throw yourself into a bad spot.
You can get way too excited way too soon.
And interestingly, no matter how slow you are, and I'm saying this in air quotes, you can have a remarkable day, relatively speaking, to other people if you just pace it right. And then the other side of it is nutrition. I feel like pacing and nutrition, assuming once again that you have like the good training already, and I'm going to ignore that aspect of it. I feel like on race day, it really comes down to those two things.
Yeah.
Well, and luck. Honestly, on that day, there's so much that can go wrong that's beyond your control, and you just have to go into it accepting that. I mean, and that was the case for me. Like I ended up crashing, but that was something. My husband was there in the pit for me, and we had talked about it that morning. It was just kind of like, okay, go in and control the things you can control, and you have to be completely prepared to let go of the things that are beyond your control. Yeah, and that's hard to do, but I think that is one of the things that you can mentally prepare yourself for.
Did you do anything? Because one of the luck points that stands out to me are the flats, because it's basically just like rocks that you could use as like a cutting tool all over the place.
They are very sharp
rock.
Yes.
What did you do to combat that, or to prepare yourself, kind of shore up against that?
Well, I ran 38s, which probably measured as 40s, and ran tubeless. And you had all the CO2 ready to go. You make it easily accessible. And the nice thing is, I mean, it is such a long race that a lot can go wrong, but if something goes wrong, there's so much time to make that up. Yeah. Like literally, I mean, you could be set back an hour and still make it up because somebody else might have bad luck or hit a wall or, figuratively speaking.
Yeah, chances are somebody else has had something too.
Yes, exactly. So you can never, this is a race that's kind of cool in the sense that you can never really count yourself out.
Yeah.
But I do think that there are a lot of things, again, on that logistical side that you can do to stack the cards in your favor. So I ran a 1x, so there was one less derailleur to have to worry about.
Right. That's like that's the thing that people miss out on 1x. They're like, I don't need it. Like I'm fine with like my 2x. You're right. You are. But on a day like this where like so many things can go wrong, why not have one less thing?
Yeah. Yeah. Smart. And I will say, the thing that really struck me about this race was how people just jumped in to help all the time. It was really, really cool. Like my husband was there supporting me, but every time I came through the pit, there were seriously like 20 people. Like, or like somebody grabbed my bike, had it on the stand. Somebody else was like helping me, rinse out my gravel rash. And I mean, it was amazing. And he told me later it was really cool being in the pit because there were people who come out every year. They know what they're doing. And since we were first timers, they were just like, hey, what do you need? Tell us what she looks like. When she comes in, we'll help out. And they had a whole concerted effort around it. It was really cool. So that part of it I think is awesome and a little bit surprising. Like you kind of hear those stories and expect it, but then when it happens, it's pretty mind-blowing actually.
Yeah, that'll be cool. I'm interested to see how Nate does. I think he'll do relatively well if he can nail the nutrition part and the pacing part. I talked about this when I did Leadville, and I think that it definitely applies here. It's really any long event, especially when it gets longer. There's like this overarching statement that I think people apply perhaps too liberally or without asterisk, so to speak. And that's like they say, if there's a group, you just need to stick with the group because it's going to make it easier. Yeah, and while that's true, if that group is riding 5% higher than your pacing goal, that's going to have a profound effect very quickly on your ability to stick to your pacing goal. Yeah. And if you can't and if you have a proper pacing goal, then you can't stick to that. It doesn't mean that you just come in slightly lower. That usually means that your performance potential drops precipitously. Right. And then you've got a nightmare of a half of the race, which is a century basically on gravel.
That's it.
So so like even it is good to stick with groups, but it has to be the right group. And even though on big long races like this, it does get strung out and it's just like one person very occasionally, I personally, like, this is a good example, I think, of like a self-check for us. When I look back at Leadville, I think, man, I was alone like all day. But I was not. And if I sit back and I'm realistic with myself, there was almost always somebody within sight, whether that person was passing me or I was passing them. So I bet if you look at it, like, clearly in the beginning, a ton of people. But then at the end, I came across with like 8 people or something. Like they were really close to me. And I bet every 10 minutes or so, there was somebody I was by. Yeah. But in my mind, I magnify those dramatic moments of when I was alone.
The isolation.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I was alone the whole time. But chances are I wasn't.
Just me and my brain.
Right. Yeah. So in this case, too, with Kansas, I feel like, especially because now when you're like, when you read the race reports of Ted King, of Jeff Kabush, they genuinely are alone because it's just the pointy end of the race. But when you're talking about amateurs, like in the meat of the pack, that's a gigantic pack. When you're talking about Kansas, it's a lot of humans on a course, and it's a very long course, but chances are you're going to come across people. You're not going to spend the whole day alone.
Yeah. And it's not like a pack per se, but it's just like small bunches and individuals along the course. So at any given point, you'll probably have someone in sight.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like if you do have somebody, or if you're with a group and you're pushing too hard, looking at you, all of you that when we came down Pipeline last year, we were in this group and it was ridiculous. I don't know what we were doing. And I dropped off the back of that because it was silly. But if it's too fast, don't just adhere to that principle. You have to stay with a group.
There's always someone behind you.
Yeah.
Right? Like at a very basic level.
Yes.
Wait for the person behind you, and then you guys can ride together, and you're going to have a much better time.
Yeah. And when you wait for somebody that's behind you and then you meet up with them, they're the most grateful person on earth.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like you're making very good friendships right there. So like, it's not like somebody's going to catch you and be a jerk to you and just drop you or something. They're going to be really grateful.
I don't think anyone was a jerk.
Yeah, like especially when you're talking
really
about 200-mile day, like, yeah, exactly. So
well, I ended up not finishing, and I remember I had crashed early in the race, and so my knee was starting to swell up later. But I finally made the decision to stop, and David was on his way to get me, and I was laying in the middle of the gravel, in the middle of nowhere, like really, really nowhere.
Genuinely the middle, like the middle of the country, the middle of Kansas, the middle of like
the road.
Lots of middles.
By the way, just quick aside, it is beautiful.
Is it?
I had no idea, but the Flint Hills are one of the most pristine pasture lands. I think it is the most pristine pasture land left in all of North America. And I had no idea that even existed. So it was really cool to be able to go and see that and appreciate that. And the cool thing, the reason it's pristine is the local people for literally the last hundreds of years have been stewarding this land.
Like taking care of it.
Volunteering to steward this land and taking care of it and making sure it remains pristine. It's really cool. So it's the middle of nowhere, but it's stunningly beautiful.
Nice.
I was out on this gravel, and there was actually a guy there with a car. He had driven out to get some pictures of the guy that he was supporting in the race. So he was waiting for his guy to come by, and he had a camera. And immediately he's like, "Are you okay? Do you need a ride somewhere?" I was like, No, my ride's coming. And he said, "How'd it go for you today?" And I was thinking, there's like a million things that had happened by that point. But really the thing that struck me was just how nice everyone was. And I was like, yeah, everyone's so nice. It's amazing. And he kind of laughed and he said, I think we're all pretty aware of how quickly things can go wrong out here. So it would take a special kind of jerk to not be nice.
Yeah, very true.
But there is that sense that you're all in the same boat out there, and it's special.
That's
it is
cool.
Really special.
Well, hopefully Nate gets in, first of all.
Yeah.
On the lottery. So, and I'm sure a lot of you listening to this also entered in for that. So congratulations on having the courage to enter for that. Because, man, if you get in, that's a really cool opportunity.
Yeah, for sure.
So, Pete, would you ever want to do Dirty Kansas?
I don't think so.
Yeah, same.
I'll happily support. Yeah, I love the logistics of supporting a race like that. Sounds super fun.
Yeah.
The riding part, man.
No, thank you.
Nah, not for me.
Yeah. I rode 200 miles once. I'm not going to do it again.
I'll just never need to ride 200 miles. I'm pretty sure.
So a couple of house cleaning items really quick. Job postings. We have trainerroad.com/jobs. You can go there. C# Engineers.
Yeah. And let me just say, being a new hire here, it's a really awesome place to work. It's really awesome. So yeah, if you're even on the fence or considering this, I highly, highly encourage you to apply.
React Native Engineers too.
Yep.
And you can go to that and check it out. Trainerroad.com/jobs. Some content that we posted this week. How to Ride Confidently in the Crosswinds by one of our new copywriters, Jesse. Thank you, Jesse. That piece is awesome. He distilled a conversation that we had on the podcast into like actionable takeaways.
Yeah, he's killing it.
And also, Jesse, for those that don't know, was also a science teacher for a few years, for a handful of years here. So he's very good at breaking things down. He actually breaks down kind of the science of crosswinds a bit in a very clear to understand way. So like, way to go, Jesse. Good job. How to use training stress. Megan, one of our copywriters, just posted that. And that one's great because training stress has tons of different directions, or you can try to take it and stretch it, but she just keeps it focused on like the takeaways that you need to have when you're riding. So those are up at blog.trainerroad.com. And then we have a race analysis video that we posted, producer Tucker. Thank you, Tucker. And then also Pete. Thanks for working on this one too. Yeah. And it's Controlling the Race with Team Cliff Bar with footage from you and then Connor Mullerby, one of your teammates.
At the Boise Twilight 1-2-3 race.
Yeah, that one's a good one.
It was fun. And it's nice having a whole team to be be able to do things like that.
Yeah. So. Like we talked so much about how to race like a team last week, right? And this is like you'll get to see some of it in action, some of the things that we talked about.
It's really fun.
Yep. Trainerroad.com/ or youtube.com/trainerroad for that. And now let's get into Brendan's question. He says, Trainer Road team, first off, thanks for the great product and 5 stars both for the product and this podcast. Thank you. And you can leave those reviews at trainerroad.com/reviews. That's for just Trainer Road in general. And if you want to review the podcast specifically, you can do it on iTunes or whichever other platform you're listening on. And we appreciate 5-star reviews. And if we don't deserve a 5-star review, just let us know what we can do to improve, and we'll do that. So it says, last year was my first racing season. I do not have a specific A race this season because my goal for this season is broad. This is actually pretty common for a lot of folks. My goal is to race as much as possible in order to gain valuable race experience and simultaneously improve my power profile as much as possible so that I can upgrade from Cat 4 to Cat 3. Quick little upcoming plug. There is another blog post that we're working on right now on this, and you can also go to blog.trainerroad.com and see one where we wrote on how the USAC upgrades point structure works. And you can get all the details there. It's all in one place. So he says, therefore, and he says, crits are the most prevalent race in my area. So I am prioritizing criterium fitness above rolling road race fitness. Therefore, what plan would you suggest? Should I use the plan builder? Answer is yes. And just pick an arbitrary race as an A race? Or since I don't have a true A race this season, should I just conduct the full base build specialty cycle? So definitely no on just moving through the plans. Use plan builder.
Yeah.
It says, do I stand to benefit more by going through the full cycle over a truncated plan that produces a peak for this specific event? So and he says, thank you, appreciate your help, and look forward to your response. This is exactly why we created Plan Builder.
Yep, it does exactly this for you in minutes.
Yes, so you don't have to worry about these questions. So that's why it exists. Definitely use that as the best way. But one of the things that stands out to me first is that he has a goal kind of laid out in the sense that he just wants to get experience and upgrade, right? But that's probably step number 1, is you have to figure out what your goal is. And in most cases, it is targeting like a specific race or a series of races, something like that. And when it comes to that, he mentioned like pick an arbitrary A race, and I wouldn't say arbitrary.
No.
Yeah.
How would you, if you had like a whole racing season, Pete, how would you pick one event to peak for?
Yeah, it's I think of it as a few different things. Your peak is kind of longer than one race, right? At the most basic level, you pick a time period to peak for, and for me, I would look at hopefully more races in that time period because more racing is more chances.
And more fitness.
And more fitness, right? It all stacks on itself.
Yeah.
I would also take a look at the actual races themselves. They don't necessarily have to be right up your alley, but you don't want them to be not up your alley, right? And if it's a local Tuesday night series, most of the races are similar, and that works really well because you can try a bunch of things. Even if it's just weekend races, I think stacking it kind of near to the end of the season, or depending on how long your season actually is the right way to finish strong. And a lot of people start tapering off at the end. I mean, there's a lot of things to wrap up into this, but it's picking a series, or 4 to 6 weeks with races that you can do well in and that like align with your goals.
For sure.
Whether that's upgrade points, winning races, top 10s, top 20s, not getting dropped, it doesn't matter. Like, you still have to wrap that all into one time period.
What sort of races would you, like, let's say you had a race series, Amber, what sort of races would fit you and why? Just to give people kind of like an example of like which ones you would pick.
Right. So I would not pick, for example, an uphill time trial.
Okay, right, yeah.
That would be the opposite of fun for me. So my strengths really come down to absolute power and tactical savvy. So I would probably want to pick a race that is going to be tactically complex or interesting, and then probably not something with a huge selective climb in it. But yeah, I think, you definitely don't pick the first race of your season to be your A race.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, unless I guess that for some weird alternative reality that you may be living in where that race pays an insane amount of points and the rest don't.
You never know. I mean, there might be a scenario where that would make sense, but probably not.
Probably not.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, to Pete's point, it's really, you can't maintain peak fitness for a full season. And I do think that you're better off, starting below peak fitness and then coming up to a peak fitness and then maybe having to back off again than just sitting somewhere in the middle for the entire year. And that's what Plan Builder can do for you. So, it doesn't have to be just an arbitrary race that you pick, but yeah, pick something where when you have those good legs, you can really make the most of them because you're racing to your strengths.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's also somewhat empowering when you're racing and you know that your best is not quite there yet, and you're still checking the boxes of being there every week and racing and acquiring experience and doing all that stuff. And you can just know that, man, come this race that I've targeted, I'm going to have all this experience and I'm going to be even better than where I'm at right now.
Right, and just because you're not within that peak, so as Pete said, that peak time, it's not one race. It's not like you're going to be at 100% on one day and then 24 hours later there's the cliff. No, like there is like a block of time where you're going to have really great legs. It doesn't mean that you're going to have really terrible legs the rest of the year. So there's a lot that you can. First of all, you can win races on terrible legs if the tactics play in your favor. It's actually really helpful sometimes to race when you're tired because it really forces you to be super efficient with, with the energy that you do have.
Yeah, you learn a ton that way.
Yeah.
So then when you do have all of that fitness, it's not like because it's super tempting when you have a lot of fitness just to like go nuts with it. Right?
You can just like break the field apart.
Yeah.
Like, I won.
Yeah. but all like, if you think about it, races are won by like 1% to 2% margins.
Right.
Right? Like really small margins.
Really small
Less than
margin.
1%. And if you're in a sprint finish with anybody, we're talking a fraction of a tenth, like it's very, very small. So in that scenario, it really does make sense. Like you said, you'll learn to be really smart with your energy and come into that. And then once you do have the fitness, then you can really make the right moves at the right time. And your fitness can back you up on doing those moves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like I think that maximizing that. So he has an X period of time. And as you get fitter and fitter and race more and more, you're like, you're combining all these things all at once for that 4 to 6 weeks, right? And so it's approaching that perfection, which you can race really well most of the year.
Oh, yeah.
I would say 80% of the year.
Yeah.
As you're going through build and going in the 12 weeks leading up to your A race, you can still race really well. Don't think of this as like selling yourself short.
Right.
And then when your season's over, you know what a full season of building and racing feels like. And so for the next year, you can do it again better.
Yeah. Picking the A race isn't about getting it right, so to speak. It's more about just allowing yourself to create structure within your season.
Yep. And that's
appropriately
just how seasons work.
Yep. Exactly.
You can never be up the whole time. Rowan Dennis, there's like a lot. He just got second in the TT National Championships. And a lot of people are like, what happened, man? And it's like, you blew it. And it's like the guy's got Tokyo to worry
brutal.
about. He's got world champs. And that's genuinely 6 months away, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, give it some time. There are natural ebbs and flows that you just can't ignore. That's just how racing works. Now, one cool thing that works that Plan Builder will do for you is that it won't just like take you to your A race and drop you off. You can have B and C events after that, and then Plan Builder will still do what's needed to maintain the fitness that you have in the best way possible, and then also bring you down appropriately so that you can train through the whole race season, whatever that is.
Yeah, and like Amber was saying, it doesn't just drop off. It doesn't go away.
Right.
It's that few percent difference. So you can still race the rest of your season after your A race and still do pretty well. It's not like you snap your fingers and your fitness is gone.
When it does drop off is when you try to keep driving things upward after a peak, and you continue and you continue and you just drive yourself into a fatigue hole. Right. That's when, yes, things do drop off. But that's why you follow a structured plan so that sort of thing doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Plan Builder won't do that to you.
Yeah, exactly. That's the right way
Plan
to go
Builder.
about it. Yeah. We need to, like we had, for people that don't know, we had a Chillo. If you don't know what the Chillo is, I think it's trainerroad.com/Chillo, or it's chillo.trainerroad.com. Producer Tucker will find it now and put it into the forum so you can see episode 240. It was an April Fool's joke that we did, and we built a whole site around this actually, and you'll be able to see it and see the video. And a little side note on that, I was the one throwing the pillow to Chad off camera. So
such hidden talent.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. But I think that we need to personify Plan Builder somehow in some way. So
like the little paper clip.
Yes,
like
clippy.
Clippy, but planning.
But planning. Yeah, I agree. Now, something just aside from all of this, if they're going to be, so in this case, if Brendan's moving from Cat 4 to Cat 3, That's his goal. There's still, and even Cat 1s, everybody can constantly learn different skills and different, like you were saying last week, Amber, there's no ceiling to skills.
No, there's
It'll
no
always help
ceiling.
you.
Yeah.
Yep.
And this could be if you are going through a situation where you are planning on racing a lot leading up to your goal event, something like that, it can be a great opportunity to just like click your plan block, whatever block that you're in with your trainer road calendar, and you can switch it to a low volume one, and you can work on skills, and that way you can just allot a bit extra time to be able to work on the other aspects of it,
Right.
of performance for that race, whether it's even just like sprint practice with your team or friends or paceline practice, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So it can be a good idea.
Yeah, and I think working both ends of the spectrum through your whole season makes a bigger difference. You have to be a well-rounded cyclist to win races.
So along these lines, I'm sure these are Brendan's goals on what he wants to do this year. As he said, he wants to go to Cat 3. And you were on the podcast last week, Amber, but Pete was not. So you get to talk about Pete's resolutions now.
Cool. Yeah, luckily I listened to your guys's, so I know all the things not to say.
Yeah, exactly.
It was funny. I don't like New Year's resolutions that much.
Yeah.
But John and I talk a lot about just having input goals, right? Like it's kind of the things that you guys discussed where there's little things that I can do that I can stay in control of, and they make big differences over time. And I'm also, now I know I'm old and wise, and so there are no silver bullets, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Like
yeah.
Strangely.
I've tried many years worth of silver bullets, and none of them are right. So what I've realized is there's little kind of consistency things that I can do. Let's see. So this year, I've been optimizing my diet.
Yeah,
We won't go.
Okay.
Yeah, let's just say I've been
it.
eating healthy. And one of the things I've always this is a problem for some people, I would imagine. I have a problem with quantity of food because I like food. It tastes good. I like to cook.
Yeah.
There's the problem with eating as much food as I want.
Yeah, and also being a responsible food preparer, you need to test things.
Yeah, always.
Have to.
Every
Yes.
5 to 10 seconds.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Last night I made popcorn while I was cooking dinner.
Yeah.
Because
as one does.
But so what I've done is I've really upped the amount of healthy food I'm eating. In fact, I didn't even cheat. I didn't have Christmas cookies over Christmas just because, it's fun for me to can I hold myself back from eating Christmas cookies?
Yeah.
And the answer is yes. And in fact, my Christmas was still awesome. So, but I've been eating a lot of healthy food, and I haven't been restricting any quantities at all. If I can put it in my mouth, I can eat it. So, it's actually worked really well. My training has been awesome. I've lost some weight. So that's worked pretty well. And now that the momentum is here, I'm going to stick to that hopefully for the whole year and see. And I don't care about the number on the scale. I'm going to eat lots of healthy food, make sure my workouts are being fueled, and we'll see where I end up.
Nice. I like that.
The other thing that I've noticed, I was looking back at some favorite races I've done and power files and things like that. And I used to be pretty fast, but one of the things that I realized is my fitness carried me for a couple years. I had a few good, super strong years, and then I could do 3 hours a week for the following year or 2 years, and I was still very fast.
Yep.
Because that fitness just carries over for so long. Unfortunately, that kind of stopped doing that last year.
It went away.
Yeah, it went away.
The window
So rude.
closed.
So I used to be really consistent with gym work too, and I would do gym work all through the season and kind of more volume. I could handle more volume, and so I'm going to go back to the gym work. Same thing we always talk about, where not enough to get stronger, but enough to maintain the strength. I'm obviously strong enough to be a cyclist currently in my the way I am.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So, but consistency on the bike, consistency in the gym, and eating lots of healthy food. I imagine I'm going to be kind of a happier, healthier cyclist. Yeah. So those are the easy ones. One of the things, this is my 10th year on Team Cliff Bar, actually. So that's kind of crazy. Thank you.
Yeah.
And also congratulations, Team Cliff Bar.
Yes.
Not only for having Pete all the time, but also just it's cool to see the team stick to their guns and take a unique approach to things for so many years.
Yeah.
It's one of the most charismatic and fun groups of bike racers I've spent time with. It's just a good group. And that's and look, we're all bike racers of one form or another, whether they're triathlete or not. We all know that charisma is usually not Bike racers are super charismatic. You know, it's just it's not necessarily the case.
Come on.
Amber's an exception to this, right? But the whole team is just like a really fun group.
And absolutely, that's probably the reason I still race, right? Is because I'm with them, and so it's really fun to get to do the big races. And so always one of the goals is to do a travel race, and that means you have to be one of the 6 fastest guys on the team, which is pretty hard.
Yeah.
And so there's a block of racing in starts with Boise, and then it's Salt Lake City, and then it's San Rafael, and then Littleton, and it's 4 weeks, 4 weekends. So one of those races, I'd like to be in the big boy race and racing.
Yeah.
You know, not hanging on.
For sure. Yeah.
So that's a good goal, and that's far enough away that I feel like if I can stick to my consistency things before that, I should be able to do that.
This reminds me of a New Year's resolution I forgot to say.
Oh, yeah?
Is it okay if I write my letter right now, so
Yeah,
to speak?
please.
Okay, yeah. You and I have talked about this before.
We have.
Dylan, director of Team Cliff Bar Racing, I'm sure you're listening to this, and I know that team members are listening to this too, so if you guys can, help me out. I will be a Cat 2 this year, and since I'll be a Cat 2 this year, I would appreciate the opportunity to guest ride for the team in one of the P1-2 fields, not obviously the pro field. It's one of the races. I think I will be going to Boise, and I will be going to Salt Lake, I believe. That's the plan as of now.
Yeah.
Please.
Signed and dotted.
Signed and dotted.
Jonathan Lee.
Yes. Intently, Jonathan Lee.
Yeah, and so that's going to be like a big one, and I think that's kind of the fire I need to keep training. Without that level of fitness being required, then I can kind of coast a little bit.
Yeah.
And that's what I've done the last couple of years is I've gotten exactly fit enough to race, and then that's enough.
Yeah.
Right. I don't actually keep going. So racing, not that racing in NorCal, racing in NorCal is hard and racing locally is hard, but it's enough skill base that I can get a entry level of fitness and then just hang out there.
Yeah. For sure.
So not do that. Keep going. And then I still have lots of fun riding all the different types of bikes. Like we had a lot of fun at the North Star Enduro.
Yeah, that's a blast.
And Carson City Off-Road. Like I like doing other things.
Yeah.
I still like jumping bikes.
Yeah.
So still do all those. Still not like if it's a Thursday and I have a workout, do my workout, but still go to the bike park or still go to North Star or, shuttle.
Have fun with
Have
them
fun.
too. Yeah, of course.
And then lastly is as a adult, I still have to do things like Home Depot and dog walks and skiing and like make everybody else happy, which I didn't used to have to do so much.
Yeah.
So kind of balancing the real joke I remember when I lived in Denver is if you could do the Saturday morning ride and ride there and ride back, it was like 100 miles. So you do 40 miles of racing miles and 100 miles total. If you could go to Home Depot and then like fix the faucet afterwards, you were in shape. If you had to lay on the couch all day, you weren't actually in shape.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Or you're just very young.
Yes.
Yeah.
Your mom fixed the faucet for
you.
So that's one that I'm going to keep bouncing. It's surprisingly easy. I think you get tougher as you get older. Now I understand like the masters racing mentality where it's like you're just tougher. Just do it.
Yeah.
It's got to be done.
It's got to be done. So I think I can do that. And then now that I know that everybody else pushes themselves harder in racing and training than I do, I just turn off. It gets hard, and I'm like, it's not for me. My arms don't go numb.
Yeah. Sorry,
I'm not like slobbering all over my face. And I was like, well, maybe I should try going one lap further. Yeah.
Nice.
So see if I can do that. And then I did look at all my best race results, and I can do the way it breaks down is I could do 500 watts for 30% of the race.
Yeah, and that's not like holding it consistently.
No,
it's like if you add up the time,
add
you
up the
spent
time.
30% of that race at one point or another doing 500 watts
or more. Yeah, and so that meant
interval search feature, right?
Interval search feature
on Trainer Road.
On Trainer Road, and I just looked at a lot of my best races over the years, and easier races were like 25%. Some of the harder ones were like 34%.
Wow. That's a lot.
It's a lot. And so that's really what my skill set is as a racer. And knowing that now, like Santa Cruz Crit and Cat's Hill, the reason I do well is because it's a bunch of really hard efforts with rests in between. And so I should make most races feel like that so that it's my strength and still do those races, which I actually really like. Like Auburn, if I'm fast enough, is pretty ideal. It's got a techie downhill that's scary, and then you climb a hill for 40 seconds, and that's that.
I'm super into you doing that at the local crits. I'll just try to hold on.
Every straightaway, it's just as hard as I can go,
Yes.
and then make the turn, and then as hard as I can go.
Yeah, please do that.
Yeah.
I'll just try to hold on, and it'll be fine.
So yeah, that's like a stretch goal, is like, let's just see if I can get back to, I think my anaerobic numbers haven't actually gone down much, but my threshold is lower. So
Sure.
We'll see how that goes.
Cool.
Yeah. And
Let's
that's it.
Nice. That's all. That's all you have to do. Let's get into Simon's question. He says, thanks for the awesome job you guys do week in and week out. Consistently one of the most credible sources of information in a space crowded with opinions rather than facts, plus 5 stars. Thank you, Simon. Appreciate that. Says, question around strength training, priority, and focus. I'm currently trying to improve my base strength and realize I might not reach my goals before season start. How far into the season training should I try to increase strength versus only maintaining? Very different strain on the body, of course. He says, I have my A races in June and July. I have decent level strength, level 1 to 2, according to your benchmarks, and you can check that out. Tucker will put that into the forum, but Coach Chad has laid down basically what he feels like are strength benchmarks, certainly not requirements, and this isn't a training plan, but they're strength benchmarks where he feels like for this sort of athlete, this is the level of strength you should have. And it's just a few key exercises that are kind of like remember when you were a kid and you were in school and you had that fitness test you had to do, and it had to be like this amount of pull-ups, and you got into this zone or whatever it was? Similar to that. Just Coach Chad is your PE teacher now. So
Or Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah, true. Yeah. Whatever you want to envision, whatever you have. Get the pump going. So he says, I have decent level strength, but I'm not quite there to the benchmarks that he wants. So kind of along the lines of what you were talking about with strength training all year, you have to step back and like look at the priorities of what you have. And as I think it's a fair assumption in this case, the main priority is to be a better cyclist, right?
Yeah.
Not just to be a really strong athlete because they're just shooting for benchmarks. So in that case, if that's what you're going for, then that simplifies things a lot, because you know that your job with all of this training isn't just to make yourself like a crazy strong human as much as a person that's, good at bike racing.
Right.
But also strong enough. So really, probably the easiest way to answer this, right, is like keep doing it until it starts adversely affecting your workouts, right?
Yeah.
More or less.
Yeah.
I think that's the really easy black and white scenario where if you start failing workouts, but you're still knocking out your gym workouts, like you're at max capacity and something's got to give.
Skip a gym workout and see how it goes after that.
Yeah.
And if you feel like if it's like night and day, it's probably a good chances are you might want to stop the weightlifting.
Right. Yeah. And this is,
or back it off.
We've talked about how to like stack weightlifting or how to fit it into your week. And it's not a good idea to try to fit in strength training on your easy days. On your medium to hard days, it's better, and medium days ideal. Your hard days, it's really tough, especially if you're doing something that's like, you're doing a lot of lower cadence work and it's like kind of dragging on the muscles, that sort of thing. It's not the same, but similar, kind of like you're pulling on the same string that strength training or that your cycling pulls on. So as a result, you're just going to blunt adaptations from across the board rather than getting 100% from both. Theoretically 100%. It's never probably quite 100%. So, but that's kind of the concept. So if you do fit it in, it's on your medium days if you can, on your hard days. So like a medium day, if you're just going through sweet spot base, that's like the day when you're doing a sweet spot workout that doesn't really push it. It's not the over-under day. That's one day where you may be doing just like high tempo, low sweet spot. That's a good day to do it. It may even be a higher volume day as long as it's not like a really difficult one, like a Saturday or a Sunday when it's a longer workout. But if it's exactly when the intensity isn't too high, it's a good time to bring it in. And I think that everybody kind of if you've gotten into strength training and you enjoy it, and I know Pete, you definitely got to this point, I'm sure, where you were basically like, okay, I have to choose if I'm strong or if I'm fast, because you used to be like jacked, like CrossFit jacked, like that was like your thing. You were a CrossFitter that also was really fast on a bike, which is pretty rare.
And there is I think. You have to pick, right? And what you'll find is one of them will plateau.
Yes.
And that's the easy one. And if you're fast enough on the bike for what your goal is, you can keep lifting, right? You just don't expect to get faster on the bike as well.
Yeah. If you have like things where it's like your back, neck, and shoulders and arms are getting so fatigued that like you're you find yourself like not even able to focus on the riding, and you're just thinking about that toward the end of the race. So like gravel racing, long road races, mountain biking, even cyclocross, even a criterium, it can happen. It doesn't have to be a long race.
Yeah.
If you have that sort of thing, then chances are you might have some strength to add.
Right. And those are things that you can even just get into like a maintenance mode too over time. It doesn't have to necessarily be like really building up that strength, but just enough that you have that muscular endurance to hold yourself up on the bike.
Yeah, because even with road racing, even though you would assume that it's not like, something that's so demanding as like cyclocross in terms of strength or something like that, you absolutely have to have the strength to be able to hold yourself on that bike properly.
For a long time.
For a long time.
Yeah. And maintenance doesn't take that much time.
No.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
Like on those medium days, like sweet spot days are perfect where I'll spend maybe 10 minutes in the gym.
Yes.
And that's all you need.
Sure.
It doesn't have to be a huge amount. And I focus on much more what I'm weak at, right? Like my hips and lower back are still pretty weak. And that's what goes first. Like on a hilly crit, if I'm up out of the saddle more than probably like 3 times, like things are bad.
We've got some work to do.
Yeah. So, but that's one where if I consistently do it, it's not that much total volume added. It doesn't affect my workout, and I am getting stronger.
Yeah, and most of us average folks listening to this, like we can fit in the strength training in a schedule.
Yeah.
Just because we don't have like, we're not pushing the absolute limits with your training volume. But like you, for example, Amber, when pro racing.
Yeah, it was a lot different.
Yeah, right? Because you'd be having huge volume and then trying to fit it in.
Right. Well, so we'd build up early season, and then once the racing season started, especially early in my career, I mean, I'd be racing 80 to over 100 race days in a season.
It's a lot.
Which is a lot.
Yeah.
And so there would actually get to a point where it would be rare that I would even have two consecutive weeks without a race. So at some point, you kind of stop training so much as you do. Your focus shifts from training to recovery, because all of the fitness gains are coming through the races, and that is at such a high intensity that in order to perform well at the next race, like your focus has to be almost 100% on recovery.
Right.
So on a schedule like that, what we would typically do, and I say we, just me and the athletes that I knew, teammates, we would usually do a lot of strength work in the off season, because it's important. Bone density, resistance training is just important generally for health, which is no less important as a professional athlete. But we would usually wind that down sometime in February, March, as the racing season kicked up, because they're just, again, like you're just desperate for that, just enough recovery to be reasonably fresh. You're almost never fresh, but like reasonably fresh for the next race. And that's a very specific scenario. So I don't think that most people are in that boat. But one of the things that we talked about also is just as far as maintenance goes, is doing some like activation type work, which is
for sure
really low stress and pretty important stuff. So one of the things, I'll just use the glutes as an example of this.
Yeah, because those are honestly the ones where a lot of people struggle with activating them throughout the pedal stroke and everything else.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting because you're during the pedal stroke, your legs are moving in a single plane. It's easy for your body to start over relying on your quads and your hamstrings to get your foot around the pedal stroke, and you don't quote unquote need your glute if you have enough compensation from the other big muscle groups.
Sure.
But your glutes are really important off the bike. And to be honest, like most of us, I mean, glutes are substantial muscls.
Yes, they are.
Big.
They're big muscles, and there's a lot of power there that you could be missing out on as far as being able to optimize that in your pedal stroke. And then off the bike, your glutes are really important for hip stability, which is huge for knee health, which, I mean, as cyclists, we all want to have our knees be in good shape most of the time. So activating your glutes is really important, and an activation exercise is really different from strength training in the sense that you're not really using an effortful contraction. You're just trying to activate the muscle. So all you're really trying to do is strengthen the connection between your brain and the muscle. So just a very gentle contraction is really all you need. And then doing that over and over again, all you're trying to do is strengthen that brain-body connection there.
Yes.
And those little you can think of them as like neuronal pathways in your brain. They literally get bigger and stronger the more that you activate them.
Yeah.
And that's really what activation is all about. You're not trying to strengthen the muscle per se. You're just trying to strengthen that pathway in your brain so that when you're on the bike and you're in the middle of a race, you're not thinking, I got to activate my glutes. Like, it's just happening because you've built that pathway in your brain.
Yeah, there's not like something that you do when you pedal where you're like, this will really help. I will say that like I do have triggers that I'll think of, and I'll be like, if I pedal like this or if I really focus on it, then it starts to happen. Like if you go onto that knee injury post that I have on the forum, I have like a thing that's called 90-90-90s. And it's like basically you sit down and then you almost make like the Isle of Man logo with your legs, so to speak, if you can like envision that. But you only have 2 legs, not 3. So, but when you do that and you get into that position, one of the exercises that I talk about there in that 90-90-90 thing is you basically try to, with your back leg, you try to lift your foot off the ground, but you don't necessarily have to lift it off the ground. You just try.
Right.
And then what you do is you try to lift your knee off the ground. And you don't, once again, have to. You just have to try, like you said, because you're just establishing the connection. And it's interesting how, like, at first you're just like, oh, I'm broken. It doesn't work.
Yeah, this doesn't even turn on.
I'm thinking, but it's just nothing's happening. And then if you continue to do those within even just a week, suddenly you're like, whoa, my foot's going an inch off the ground and my knee is too. And it's not, like you said, it's not because you're getting a lot of strength. It's just because you've established those pathways, and that carries over. Your body remembers that, and then it knows that in motion it can use it. And one thing that I think that a lot of people, and man, some people get really like aggressive on this, like with like the fact that like the glutes are not needed in the pedal stroke. And like, while it's true that they may not be needed, the one thing that they do a great job of is stabilization of the hip, which then goes into stabilization of the knee
And your ankles.
and your ankles, everything, right?
Yeah.
And then it affects your back, because also all that's affected. Let's just assume that you are not using your glutes, like they've turned off, so to speak, and you don't have those pathways connected. You're just asking your the 4 quadricep muscles and everything else that's in your upper leg and even in your lower leg and everything else. You're saying, okay, it's up to you to stabilize, because the glute back there, he's not doing his job to stabilize. So you've got to push the pedals and you have to stabilize. So distracted focus. And you have to do both of them perfectly. And even though you're not really designed to stabilize most effectively like this.
Right.
So then that's when things start to get built into imbalances and issues happen. So that's why you want to activate them. We got a question on YouTube about this, and somebody's asking, like, how do I activate the glutes when I pedal? It's about activating them off the bike and establishing those pathways, and then you'll find yourself utilizing them. And then the whole point, and then he asked why, the whole point is for that stabilization. So, like, even that sort of stuff can be effective strength training, right? Because it doesn't have to be, like you said, it could be 10 minutes in the gym. It could be just an exercise like that. And if you're pushing your limits with volume, like what you were talking about, it would be like, really, it's just a race to see who can recover fastest. So it doesn't make sense to go spend a ton of time in the gym, because you're just going to drive yourself down. So there are tons of ways where you can kind of shore up the weaknesses on the body's strength and mechanical efficiency, so to speak.
Yeah, and the activation stuff, like I said, it's really low stress. You're not like cranking out huge reps and huge loads. So it's something that you can really do year round. One of the things that I think is really interesting, the first time I tried to do this, I didn't realize that my glutes are really shut off until a PT said, try these exercises. And I was trying them and I was like, oh, I can totally do this. And the PT said, okay, well, now try to do the exercise, but don't recruit your hamstring. Don't recruit your back. And then it was like, oh,
This is hard.
this is a lot
Nothing
harder
is
than-
happening.
Wait a minute. So what had happened for me was like the glute had started to shut down, but it was like I couldn't engage it without compensation from other muscle groups.
Oh, yeah.
Which is really interesting. So as you start to do these, it requires a lot of focus to even be aware of, what are you actually pulling into that engagement. And one of the things I will say that is really helpful with this is using your proprioception. And proprioception is just your brain's ability to map your body in space. So if you're just sitting here, I can't see my knee, but I know generally where my knee is in space. And that's a really great tool to use for this. And I have a funny story about this. So to use proprioception and activation work, sometimes you can just like put your finger or your hand on the muscle that you're trying to activate. And then you can feel when it actually does fire or not. Because sometimes it's hard to do that without that extra feedback. And so the proprioceptive feedback is really helpful. I told a friend of mine this who was having some knee problems. And I said, well, are you making sure to activate your glutes when you're pedaling the bike? And he said, I don't know. I said, okay, well, next time you're out on the bike, just put your finger on your glute and you can feel when you're actually activating it or not, and then see if you feel a difference in how your knee feels when you're activating your glute. a couple weeks later, I saw him at the bike shop, and he yelled from across the shop. He's like, "Hey, Amber, I did that thing that you told me. Stuck my finger in my butt. It totally worked." And I was like, whoa. That is not what I said. For the record, that is not what I said.
Oh, man.
Phrasing.
Yeah, phrasing. Phrasing is important. But that proprioceptive feedback can be really, really helpful. And for him, actually, just learning to engage his glute was enough to take away the stress on the knee, because it was that stabilization that was needed just to get the knee tracking properly. So you may not even have this problem. You know, just because it's a common problem doesn't mean it's something that you have. So if it ain't broke, maybe don't, try to fix it. But it's not a bad thing to test and try to work on.
Can I share some other activation things?
Yeah, please do.
For that?
It's great stuff.
So once again, perhaps this is a bit TMI, but every time I drive to work,
did you hear the story I just told?
The threshold is low. So, but anytime I drive to work and drive back, I do 200 per side of just activations, basically contractions of each side of my glutes. And it's something that and, some of us more than others, I guess. And Pete, for those that don't know, you can join us on YouTube. You could have seen Pete wobbling back and forth. But that honestly helps a lot. And that was a habit that I got when I was really in the throes of just PT and not doing anything else. And it's funny because I would start out every morning, and I'd start out with 1 to 200, and I would be like, I'd feel so ineffective on 1, 2, 1 through 10, whatever else. And then fast forward to like 100, and I was like, I got this. Like, it's just like my body had it again. But it takes some time. One other weird thing that I do, and this is, once again, and this, I don't share this because this is what you should do. I share this because you should find what works for you. But on the bike, one thing that I find is that I have a tendency to kind of to shift my sit bones so that I am shifted to rider's right of my saddle ever so slightly. And I don't really notice it until I really start to think about it. So one of the things that I do is when I think consciously, shift my left sit bone to the left side of my saddle more. In other words, shift my whole body to the left. It ends up putting my pelvis in a position where I can use my glutes more, and I feel it instantly.
Interesting.
So it's like you have to find and once again, at first it's really tough to even do. So maybe start with just feeling your muscle to see if it activates.
Right.
But then you'll get to this point where you can actually be very in tune with it.
You're training your awareness.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, you can train your awareness.
I've got one more to add on John's thing. I have the same exact same problem, but I need to pull my pelvis back and down and pull my belly button in to like create that curve inside of me to make my sit bones actually be on my saddle. And so what I do is any short, intense effort on the trainer, I pull myself into the right position and like hunker down, like exactly like I'm racing, and put all my energy into activating everything for full 30 seconds or whatever. And I actually just started this year, and the first like workout was awful. My body
so hard to focus on that and hit the power.
Exactly, it was terrible. And so like not only was it taxing mentally, but also the numbers weren't really there. Everything. And I did it 2 days ago, and I was like, it's back. Like this is easy again. But it took weeks of actually firing everything and getting in the right position and being able to get my forearms flat. But it's thinking about a lot of things, and then gets easier.
A lot of cognitive load.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of cognitive. But again, like this time of year right now is such a good time to work on this stuff.
Oh yeah.
Because you're not diving into like really high intensity stuff yet. You're not racing yet. So this is the time where those kind of high cognitive load skills form, all those things that you need to focus on. Focus really hard on that stuff now so that it becomes automatic by the time you start racing.
Yeah. This is probably one of the best things you can do preventatively speaking for injuries, because a lot of us cyclists, we're constantly, we don't think about them, and we act like they don't exist until they really do exist, and boy, do they ever.
Yeah, they don't impact you until you're in a terrible spot.
Yes, exactly.
It's really how injuries work on the bike.
Yeah. So when that happens, that's why we talk about strength training so much. That's why we talk about, like we're talking about here, activation, making sure things are firing. And actually on YouTube right now, somebody just asked, like, how do you know if your glute is activated? And really, it's all about if it's firing. And if it's firing effectively,
and by
that's
firing
step
is just, is it contracting? So if you just stick your hand on your bicep and then do a bicep curl, you can feel the muscle contract under your hand. It's the same thing with your glute.
And it's tricky to feel that, like you said, individually a lot of the time, to control that individually.
Right. You might feel the glute firing, but you might also be firing your hamstring at the same time. So doing some of these activation exercises off the bike will kind of start to create that connection. So we talked a little bit about this in the forum. This would actually be, if anybody wants to jump into the forum with other ideas, it'd be great. I think after the last podcast, I at least contributed a post to a question about this, but lying on your stomach and then bending your knee up at 90 degrees, just one leg at a time. And so you're
so hard.
Yeah, it's like impossible.
Well, your quad is all the way. Your quad is in contact with the ground, and then you just squeeze that butt cheek. You just try to activate that one glute, and it's really hard to do it without activating your hamstring and your back at the same time. And again, like, you're not necessarily trying to lift your knee off the ground. Like, it might not even move off the ground. It's just you're just trying to activate that glute. And again, like, you can use that proprioceptive feedback, but really try to focus and see, like, am I activating glute hamstring back, or is it glute hamstring, or is it glute back? And then when can you just isolate it down to just the glute? And it might take a while. You have to be a little bit patient and consistent with this.
Yeah, and it's not a wasted session.
No.
If you sit there and do it and you don't make any progress and you feel like I'm uncoordinated and I can't make this happen, that's good. That's like, you keep pressing through that, and then eventually it will come.
Well, every time you don't do it quite right is an opportunity to teach your brain what not to do and what you're looking for. And it's just that constant reinforcement. So every time you're not quite getting it right, it's okay. Just try again, because every time you repeat that, you're building, again, that synapse pathway in your brain.
Yep.
And that's what you're really going for.
Yeah. And that's one of the, like, kind of full circle back to the 90-90-90 thing. That's when you put yourself in that position, it, like, doesn't allow you to cheat because you can't really contract anything else beside that.
That's nice.
So that's,
That's a good one.
So it's kind of like putting training wheels on, because then it just puts you in a situation where you have to then just use your glutes, specifically your glute med. So, which is a tough one, and it likes to go to sleep. So let's get into Michael's question. This one, he says, I'm a triathlete with a question about a multi-year plan. I'd like to target a 2021 and or 2022 Kona qualification attempt. Kudos to you. He says, but will not be doing a full Ironman race in 2020, as my goals are a top 10 in my age group in the USAT Nationals, and getting a buy-in from the wife for another season of Ironman training is off the table. Totally understand that, Michael. And also, way to go on setting a really high goal, the top 10 age group at USAT Nats. That's impressive stuff.
Awesome.
So specifically, my question is, will spending a year working on getting more speed in a distance like an Olympic distance triathlon going to be beneficial to me when I go for my Kona attempt? Or am I sabotaging my 2021 and 2022 for my goals this year? Additionally, are there any modifications I should make to the Olympic training plan given my goals for the next couple of years? Thanks again for hosting this podcast. Learned a great deal from it and have been evangelizing it to anybody that will listen. Awesome. And that's basically, like, number one in terms of, like, what you can do to help the podcast. Like, share it. That's awesome. Yeah. We appreciate you all doing that. So really, I'll boil this question down into a few things. He's planning to eventually race longer distances, but currently is focusing on shorter distances. So the question is racing this shorter distance going to help him in any way for the full distance, or is it going to hinder him in any way for that longer distance racing? And that, I think, applies to much more. These principles apply to triathletes. They apply to mountain bikers, to road cyclists, and to anybody. The same principles still go there. And I think that I see a lot of us, we fall into a trap of thinking, like, entirely different sport. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, no. Like cyclocross is entirely different. But then, like, if you ask somebody that doesn't ride bikes, like, is this the same sport? They'll be like, yes. Like
100%.
Yes. They're pedaling a bicycle. And we kind of forget, and a lot of the time we build up, like, Olympic distance triathlon, like, entirely different everything. And we don't think of the crossover or even the benefits that you can get for training at a shorter distance. Because honestly, and we talk about this a lot, like, I guarantee you Nate is not going to be doing any 14-hour rides to prep for Kansas if he gets in.
No.
You don't have to do super long rides to race well at super long distances.
Right.
When we're talking about the energy systems that we use, they have a really broad spectrum in terms of usage, and they stretch out a long way, especially when you're talking about events like even an Olympic distance triathlon.
That's still a long event.
It's still a long event.
Endurance.
Yeah.
It's not a sprint triathlon.
No.
It's not a CrossFit WOD, right?
No.
It's like it's still long.
It's a long time.
Yeah.
Right? Like you're still in the greater than 2 hours or, right?
Sure.
Like anything in that realm, like you said, it stretches out a long time. So once you're in that endurance plane, it's a big plane.
Yeah, exactly.
My husband used to be a downhill ski racer, and his event was slalom. So whenever I'd get nervous before bike races, he'd be like, "Why? I don't understand why you're nervous. You have like hours to figure it out."
That's a really good point. Yeah,
It's true.
Okay, yeah.
He's
Good
like, I had
perspective.
48 seconds.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, totally different deal, right? But even then, that's a really good example. Like Michaela Schifrin, she's and forgive me, I'm a ski nerd, right? But Michaela Schifrin, she's one of the greatest skiers of all time.
Yeah.
And she's establishing herself as that. But she's doing Super G, which is like a longer, different, and like there are plenty of coaches in that sport. And there we're talking about 1 minute to 2 minutes.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And the like coaches are like, it's entirely different. But it shows that even, and it's true, as the duration gets shorter, the resolution becomes finer and the
Right.
separation becomes different because you're using different energy systems, right?
Yeah.
But in this case, when we're talking about anything that's really, when we're stretching like 20 minutes or more,
Oh, yeah.
like we're starting to pull on the same strings.
Exactly.
Yep.
So in this case, even though she's dominant in one field primarily, she still is able to be successful in the other. And I mean, you can see that even with tons of athletes that you see that do well at a bunch of different events, like Colin Strickland does really well at Kansas.
And at Tulsa Tough.
And it does really well at crits, right?
Yeah.
So really good example there. So I guess this is just, but stepping back, this is how everybody does everything. Like most of us, and road cycling is probably a bit unique because you might start off with like a century, but certainly in triathlon, you start out with sprint or Olympic and then you work your way up.
Yep.
So it's totally normal. And honestly, it's kind of ideal, right, Amber? I mean,
Yeah, I think so for sure.
builds the sort of athlete that you need to be.
Yeah, you're working. I mean, all of the systems and skills have a lot of crossover, and then any kind of speed work. I think. I mean, it's again, this is all under the umbrella of endurance training, endurance performance.
Yeah.
So you're training all of the same systems.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is you can build your speed so effectively because you're racing at a higher intensity and you refine at that higher intensity level. And honestly, it also raises your threshold. It's more likely to do so.
Yeah, it's more likely that you're going to increase your speed. And one thing I think that's important too is you get to do more shorter races.
Yeah.
Right? It's your wife is happier.
Yes.
It's less training
Yeah.
or less overall time commitments.
Yep.
So you get to try more things in more races and do more higher intensity pieces of the puzzle.
More experience.
Yeah.
You get used to the racing process and it's just more dialed in. And as you raise your threshold, like with the Olympic training, that means that your threshold is higher. So then on race day, when you're racing your full distance races, eventually qualifying for Kona, and you're riding at 200 watts, that's going to be a smaller portion of or a smaller percentage of your threshold, which means it's going to be easier to ride at, which means your run is going to be easier, which means nutrition is going to be easier to take in, the whole thing. It makes sense, and that's why you see a lot of athletes drop down from the full distance and they do shorter ones and then they come back, and it's common to see. So super helpful. And with this, I think like this should help you on like the when we talk about intensity and skills in general. Even though it seems like Ironman triathlon is really straightforward, when you talk about the fatigue that adds up, it really does become more complex. And to your point of like you race more, so when you race more, you're going to get used to these sort of things. You look at Kona and it's like there's one turn on the course basically, right? There's a few in the beginning, but then and after that like a turn at the end. But it's basically like one big turnaround, and you think it wouldn't be complicated, but when you get that fatigued, it's really tough to be able to like figure out all that stuff.
Right.
Watching people not shift into their small chain ring before the climb.
You're like, this is so logical. Why aren't you doing it?
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh yeah, it's 100 degrees, and you just swam.
You just
and
swam as hard as you could for an hour, and then you directly jumped on your bike, and your helmet's, it's like all these things, and it's like, I would forget too.
It makes sense, right? And as a result, like you'll kind of with this with more racing and then higher intensity racing, you'll kind of like you'll raise the cognitive load that you're used
absolutely.
to, and then everything starts to calm down. So then on race day, especially once you get into like a full distance race, you'll be like, Psh, I got this.
Right. Every race you do, you're practicing the cognitive load that's unique to racing, which we all know it's very different in racing than it is in training. So the more you experience that, the more it's going to seem normal to you. And then the other thing is when you're experiencing all of those inputs at higher speeds, relatively speaking. Again, like experiencing those things at higher speed is a higher cognitive load, but the more you get used to that, then when you get to a longer race, the speeds are lower. There's a lot, maybe less technical stuff. Your brain has already adapted to this level of load. It'll seem not easy, but it will just seem a little bit slower. I was sharing with the guys a couple days ago that a friend of mine used to race super bikes. And we were in a big group ride on just regular road push bikes, and there was a crash. And it was really interesting to hear everybody's accounts of what had happened, because everyone else was saying XYZ, and then it just happened, or and then I don't know what happened next, and all of a sudden, and and then his account of it was like in this very detailed, step by step, like every split second that went by, like his awareness was just he's trained his awareness at this high level, racing at these really high speeds, that he can just process this stuff at such a faster pace than most people can, because it's not something that they've trained. But this is an interesting benefit that comes from doing those shorter distances, doing more races, doing them at a higher speed. The speed work has a lot of benefit aside from the physiological benefits that we would see from it, which are significant.
Oh yeah, 100%. It's kind of funny too, because if you focus on and look at Jan Frodeno and look at Gomez, look at so many great athletes that have come up through triathlon, and they focus in ITU for a long time, and then from ITU, then they'll go and the Olympics, that sort of stuff, and then they go up into the higher distances, but they also bounce back down. And it's funny. So there's a quote that that I talked about and I brought up in our meeting. Yeah. And I looked it up and I never found like a solid source on this one. So, but it was kind of assumed for a long time that you just could not do more than 1 to 2 full distance races, right? And that was kind of like the assumption way back when
within a season.
Within a season, yeah. It was if you did more than that. I remember like somebody was saying something like, you aged like 14 years, like the time
in a single 12-hour
Ironman. Yeah. I'm not sure there was any science in that, but
sounded good though.
Sounds pretty cool.
It's very dramatic.
Yeah.
Clickbait.
Right. Exactly. If you look, there are certain racers that do a lot of halves and fulls, even like a lot of fulls. But for us average folks that have lives that are demanding, families, jobs, everything else that you have, all the other responsibilities in your life. When you have all of those, it's
Home Depot.
Yeah.
Big deal.
Big day.
Yeah, big day. Nice little Saturday. So when you have all of those things pulling on you and adding stress, it's really good to I think continually race these shorter races, just because and not race as many of the really, really, really long ones. Just because once again it gets really tough to be able to recover from all of that.
A lot of those people racing a bunch of full distance are earning their paychecks. Don't forget, it's money that they win for their job every time they do a full distance. Yes. So they have to pay the bills, and so they have to do races.
And even if you can do it, it doesn't necessarily mean that you should do it.
Yep.
And that's like the very common saying that we all hear.
It should be applied to more things.
Yes, it should. That's for sure.
Just because you can
doesn't mean you should.
And when you look at like racing short races, like Olympic races, they definitely have even sprints. They have their place in a full distance athletes regimen, even in the same season. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's something that you see a lot of athletes work through. So the last point that I would add to this, just in this case, Michael, is if you are going to qualify, it looks like you're probably going to need, because we would be in the same age group, more or less, because you're 36 in this case. And also, we should say really quick, just to toot Michael's horn really quick, because Michael shared some stats with us. 36, 6'4", so really tall.
Really tall.
Weighs about 195 pounds to around 89 kilos, but the weight's dropping, hopes to be around 185. But FTP of 305, half marathon PR of 127, Olympic distance PR of 214, and then Ironman PR of 1027. But he did it with a head cold. And looking at that time is like proportionate or disproportionately slow compared to the rest.
Compared to his rest of his.
So I expect him to be able to go sub 10. But yeah, I would assume he'd have to do somewhere around a 9:30 at least. That's not at every race. But looking at Kona qualifications, to like guarantee yourself Kona qualification in that age group, 9:30 is where you need to be and to basically guarantee yourself. But of course, that depends on every race. Don't at me, triathletes. Anyways, good luck with that, Michael. And once again, you'll only be helping yourself, in my opinion, with doing a season of Olympic focus.
Absolutely.
Especially pushing toward like an age group top 10.
Yep.
Because you'll be really like pushing hard on that.
Yep.
Threshold should go up, everything else, cognitive load. And then you'll show up at a full distance and you'll be like, I don't know what everybody's talking about. This is just easy, right? Right? That's what you were saying? Sure.
If that's what you're thinking, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah,
But.
the truth. Carrie says, I'm a longtime listener and recent subscriber of your product. I love the podcast as well as the features of your product. Keep up the good work. Thanks, Carrie. I remember hearing y'all recently got excited over trying to figure out what to do with a person with a, and he says in quotes, blank slate scenario, and thought I would have you help me figure out what to do. I've had a few injuries and struggles with motivation over the past couple of years, but recently fell back in love with cycling, running, and racing. And I want to satisfy my competitive itch and feel like I'm training for something. I'm on the fence of trying something completely new or going all in to see if I can better my previous results. My history has been in triathlon, but outside of buying bike speed, and what he means by that is buying upgrades, or whether it's wind tunnel time, whatever that may be, I've struggled to break through on the bike. This leaves me consistently losing time to my rivals and having to rely on my running speed to catch them. I've been wanting to get into more single sport racing, but don't know what I would choose. We mostly have crits here in North Carolina with very few road races or time trials to train for. As a smaller person who is very endurance-based, I tend to leave crits feeling underwhelmed. I would do well in the mountains, but there are few competitive events. I'm tempted to get off-road since cross, gravel, and mountain bike generally have a number of opportunities here. He's talking about climbing opportunities. But I only ride casually off-road during my off-season and have never trained to go fast off-road. So given this information and the following, what would you do if you were in my shoes? Just curious to hear of your thoughts as coaches. So height, 172 centimeters. Weight, 61 kilograms. So light athlete there. FTP of 270 watts. That puts him at about 4.4 watts per kilogram. He says, I've been here for about 2+ years. His 5K running PR is 18, so very fast. VO2 max is 72 milliliters per kilogram per minute. He says, seems higher than my performances indicate. That's a really high VO2 max.
Yeah.
Pretty high.
That's pretty high.
Yep. So especially, we're not talking like, I know Indurain had a crazy one. We're not talking about
but
Indurain,
as far
right?
as the normal people,
Yes.
the realm of
Bell curve.
normal.
I just hit the microphone. Sorry,
probably
guys.
did. And these
Punching
microphones
mics.
are amazing. They probably didn't even hear it. So, with all of that in mind, really high VO2 max, light rider, good power to weight ratio, really fast runner
Yeah.
as well. But as he's saying, he feels like on the bike, he isn't able to execute like he wants to.
Yeah.
So I guess that one thing that we don't know, and if you're listening to this could help us for sure, Carrie, but what is your end game? Is you mentioned that your background's in triathlon, you've wanted to get into single sport racing. So is your goal to be a good single sport racer, or is your goal to be a better triathlete? And because a lot of multi-sport athletes focus on one discipline for a bit, bring what they learned back into that, and then improve the game overall.
Yep.
So I guess let's just take the cycling approach more than anything.
Yeah.
And let's talk about what events he would do well in or what he wouldn't do well in with this profile that he's given us. And crits, I guess, first thing, because he mentioned the fact that he leaves them underwhelmed.
Yeah.
But rider size doesn't necessarily determine whether you're good in a crit or not.
No. I think what we talked about is that crits are so skill based. They really are, right? Like when it's probably half skill. You can be a very fast rider and not have the skills and still do okay, and you can be not fast and have the skills and still do okay.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the problems that we've seen here locally and nationally and everywhere is that lighter kind of climbier riders, the tricks and trades they learn from group rides and riding with their friends don't translate to criteriums. The same skill you do to cause pain for your friends climbing hills and accelerations and things like that is actually not what you want to be doing during the crit. So you have to kind of relearn the way to attack and pedal correctly and pedal hard and when to pedal and
efficiency too.
Efficiency.
Because the climber always suffers from this like eagerness to use their strength, which is on the climb. So they'll be able to squeak by just because they'll be able to deliver such a massive blow because weight comes into play so much, right?
Exactly.
So and as a result, they look back at the race, and while they were near getting popped off the back, they ended up being, minutes ahead of everybody on that climb. So they think, oh, everything is fine. Yeah. But the fact is, you were really close. That's the unique thing about bike racing. You were really close to just not even being able to make that move on that climb because of that. So this is like a key point for climbers to understand.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that is really hard to convince, you can kind of teach them the other things, but the timing is really hard to kind of hammer home, is that it's a big difference. We talk about with Nate all the time in the race videos. It's like a 1/10 of a second or a 1/4 of a second is the difference between a hard effort and a medium effort. And climbers over and over and over, and it happens 100 times in a race. Yeah. And so the climber, I'm really throwing an umbrella out there, the climbers. Just people who aren't used to racing crits, period.
Sure.
It can be anybody. It's figuring out that timing is hard, and it takes more time racing crits to figure out the timing, and it's not that fun while you're figuring it out. And that's why a lot of people
it's a steep learning curve.
Start racing crits and then go, oh, they're not for me.
Yeah.
Right.
Because it's not that fun when you are learning the timing and kind of the flow of the race and how to actually use your power.
Well, and there's no roadmap to learn.
Yes.
Unless you have, find a mentor who's really good at this stuff. If you have like Harry is saying here, there's a sounds like an abundance of local crits. Well, probably there's at least a handful of people that have been doing those for a really long time. Yeah. Go talk to them. Let them know that you're really interested in getting better at this, because otherwise you're in there, you're not doing the right things. But unless you have somebody guiding you and pointing out your mistakes and then what you should be doing instead, it just prolongs that very painful learning curve. But to your point, Pete, this is stuff that, you have to get in the race and you have to live it to really learn it. It's you can whiteboard it and maybe have a little bit of an idea, but really it's where the rubber meets the road on this one. And it helps so much to have at least some guidance with that, because especially if somebody's who's racing with you or they're at the race, they can see you in the race because they're in the same field as you, or they're waiting for their own race and can kind of watch what you're doing and give you feedback. But that's really the fastest way to learn. And it's so fun.
Yeah, it is.
It's painful when you're making those mistakes, but the cool thing is we go back to what we said earlier. There's no ceiling on these skills. Yeah. So even if you've hit a plateau on your FTP, there's no reason that you can't continue to become an even better bike racer with every single race that you do.
Yep. Yeah, and so that's why there's such a wide range of people that can be successful in terms of body types or size in criterium racing. Yeah. I think of on the Cliff team, we have AJ, right? And then we have Stefan. Stefan's gigantic, really tall, gigantic male model guy.
Large human.
Yeah, and then you have AJ, who's probably 5'7",
5'8", and 145 pounds.
Yep, small person. And then on the women's side, you have somebody like Corinne Rivera.
Yeah, Corinne Rivera, Valentina Scandalara. They're just small people, especially compared to me. But
sure. But then you're good at crits too.
Yeah, I'm good at crits too. I'm 5'10". It's and you look at some of the best racers on the women's side, Ina Teutenberg, Kirsten Wield. And the other thing is you don't have to be a quote unquote sprinter to be a crit racer, to be good at crits. Again, the skill set, there are so many ways that you can win a crit that isn't necessarily in a sprint.
Yes.
And if you're good at using your energy and you're tactically savvy and you can read the race well, sky's the limit, honestly.
Oh yeah. We talk about this so often on the podcast. There's no point in putting yourself in a box as a rider, especially based off of your rider type. Figuring out your rider identity, so to speak. As a pro athlete, you can kind of be just like an actor. You can be typecast, and then that's just who you are.
This is what you got to do today.
Yep, yeah. Like Ryan Gosling, he'll never not be a heartthrob, right?
Poor Ryan Gosling. He's just pigeonholed.
Terrible life, I know, right? But then,
we're sorry, Ryan.
Yeah, exactly. He definitely listens to this. But then, if you think of athletes that are pro racers, you can definitely get typecast if you're a pro athlete, right?
Right. But so a lot of athletes, I've seen a lot of athletes. Corinne is a great example. So she was always a really talented sprinter, but that woman can climb. And she really worked on that. She didn't allow herself to get pigeonholed. Certainly that was part of what was earning her contracts, was her ability to sprint and her tactical savvy and a bunch kick. But she never stopped working on her climbing. And she is a very, very strong contender in those climbs now, which is great because she's got that fast finish and now she can make more of the selections that she didn't used to be able to. I'm talking 5-10 years ago now, but again, the sky's the limit. And so she never, she could very easily early on in her career have said, I'm a sprinter.
Yeah. This is what I'm going to do.
And then that would have been
it.
so self-limiting because it wouldn't have opened the door to, hey, why not me? Why not? Why couldn't I be a climber? There's no reason not to work on that. There's no reason I can't get better at that. So she did. And so I think, especially Carrie, in your case, you're talking about kind of being this blank slate. I mean, I think that's a really wonderful approach, honestly, and more of us could learn from that in terms of just saying like, okay, what are the stories that I tell about myself in my head that end up becoming, just self-perpetuating, self-perpetuating limiters that aren't necessary, but they're very real. I mean, even if it's quote unquote just in your head, I mean, that if you come up to a climb every time and you just think, oh God, I hate climbing, I'm not a climber, versus
not going to go well.
It's not going to go well. Like, it's just, I mean, versus coming to the climb and just being like, heck yeah, let's see what I can do today.
Yeah.
I mean, totally different mindset. And that small shift can make such a huge difference. And so I think it's good to step back and just, what are the things that you're telling yourself? How are you identifying yourself as an athlete? And are some of those stories that you're telling yourself, are they true?
Yeah.
Are they limiting you?
Yeah. And when you talk about which racing you should go into, it really comes down to like what excites you and what you want to do.
Yeah.
And you mentioned like the off-road side. This sounds like a great fit for you because you'll have more racing choices around you. 'Cause that's another thing too. Like you could pick to be I'm going to be a climber, but you live in Kansas. So like you're just never going to have races that you get to use your skill. And this is a situation where living in North Carolina definitely has climbing opportunities near him. And if he can't find those in the form of road, go off-road. And then you'll be able to learn a ton of skills with off-road that will then help you a lot when you get back into, once again, we talked about like the difficulty of, even though for cyclists, they'll joke and say like a triathlon bike leg is just totally non-technical and simple. It's a different deal when you're in the middle of a triathlon.
Yeah.
But this will definitely increase your familiarity and comfort on the bike if you're doing off-road stuff. So then when you get on-road, it will feel relatively just like a non-factor, so to speak, because you're used to that.
Yeah. I want to just mention a quick thing here. There's a whole range of choices that you've got here. And I think a trap that people often fall into is, well, I need to do the thing that I'm good at. And okay, it's fun to be good at something. It's fun to have success with it, but that's not the only reason that something is fun. And so just because you're naturally good at something, it doesn't obligate you to do that thing.
Yes.
Because it's certainly the case for some people that they happen to be naturally talented at something that makes them miserable. It does happen. So don't feel like you have to figure out what you're good at and go do that thing. Like figure out what it is that, really lights your fire and go do that thing. I mean, again, I think it is fun to be good at something, but I think even more fun than being good at something is improving at something.
Yeah.
And especially improving at something that you actually really enjoy. So I would say, really which one of these things really lights your fire, and is it something that you're going to enjoy the process of improving at and go in that direction?
Yeah, like that saying, be brave enough to suck at something new comes to mind, right? Like and Pete, like this year, EWS, you had never done anything like that.
Never.
Like that was totally new.
Yeah. And it was really fun.
Yeah,
it's
scary
one of those,
too at times, right?
Very scary.
Yeah.
Like I actually had I was like having problems going to sleep on Friday night. Before the road gap, and I was like, no, well, it is what it is, right? But and I think and having this blank slate, do everything, right?
Yeah.
If there's nothing that you have to do here and now, do everything.
Why not?
Figure out what you actually like.
Oh yeah, 100%. So, and I think that those are kind of like we've talked about before too, like there's no ceiling to the skills once again. So you can keep building that and that'll really help you. And then on top of that, you'll get some tactical skill, which I know you may think, oh, that's probably not going to help me with triathlon. It totally does. Because it teaches you to be a heads up racer and an analytical racer, which especially when you get into longer distance stuff, and especially in triathlon, where it's many times much more a race against yourself rather than a race against your competitors. You still gain so much from learning to be competitive against other racers and tactical, even just in how you deal with yourself, and how you challenge yourself to go through with things.
Identifying where you're gaining free speed on a course, and then training your own your RPE, what are the sensations that you're feeling, and how to read those appropriately on the day.
Oh, yeah.
All of those things can make a huge difference. And all of those things are very tactical.
Yeah.
Totally.
Watching someone else make a mistake gives you so much more energy. It's amazing. Like watching someone like,
sorry, person.
Yeah, like that's amazing. I'm doing it so much better than you right now. And that helps.
That internal self-talk that we don't want to externalize ever. But that's real. We all know it.
That's real.
Yeah, we all know it.
I had a friend who raced professionally and used to say, I hate everything about cycling. I hate the racing. I hate the training. I hate every minute of it, except that one moment when you know that the person next to you is suffering incrementally more than you are.
Yes.
And it makes it all worth it.
Suddenly you're higher than them. It's like amazing. Yeah.
Blossom into this beautiful person.
I think it's because we beat ourselves down so much, right? Like in terms of like the efforts and what we do, it's so hard, and we subject ourselves to suffering so much. And sometimes this sounds terrible, but it feels nice to have somebody else that's suffering a little more. Like
it's true.
It is what it is, especially when we're talking about results are on the line.
Honestly, I think we can build up our competitors in our mind to a point where it's just like, oh, they never have to deal with this, or they always look fresh at a race, or they're always going to be strong on the climbs. And then we see that moment of weakness, and it's reassuring to us to know that even the people that we put on a pedestal are also human beings, and they might be suffering with the same issues or challenges that I am. And I don't know, I think it's empowering.
Yeah, for sure.
Without putting them down, it's just empowering to know that we're all a bunch of human beings out there in the same boat.
Totally. Yeah. You're not unique in your situation. Like chances are, if you showed up to the race unprepared, you're not the only one.
Definitely not the only one.
If you're feeling like this climb is really hard, chances are you're not the only one. Like,
absolutely.
There are other people feeling it. We're all in it together. Tim's question says, a physiology question for you. We're going to be light on the physiological answer that we'll give you here, and no Coach Chad to dive deep into the science, but just the same.
You only have us guys.
He says, I'm in a group of certifiable wackos who do a 500-mile weekend, 4 days every spring, and 400 miles in 3 days every fall. So that's a lot of volume packed into a small bit. I won't call you certifiable wackos, though. You're just cyclists. He says the first day in spring is the big day at 215 miles. The last day is 175. We stop for bio breaks, water, and food about every 30 miles or so for about 15 minutes each, with a longer lunch stop midday. This sounds like my worst nightmare. Sorry, Tim. I don't want to join that ride. I don't want to stop that much. That just sounds really rough. He says, the stops later in the day, lunch and later, always seem to have consequences. Legs that hurt for the first 5 to 15 minutes after getting back on the bike. The longer the stop, the worse the hurt. All of us have the same issue to a greater or lesser degree, and it doesn't seem to vary much with personal fitness, age, or gender. We all groan when starting back up. Toward the end of the day, it's really a question of which is worse, stopping or not stopping. So my question is, why, and is there anything to be done about it? I will answer that last one and say stop less. But he says, thanks, love the podcast, recommend it to every cyclist I know. Thank you so much, Tim, for doing that. And I'm looking forward to Amber's podcast contributions.
Thanks, Tim.
We're going to cover something really quick here, Amber.
Okay.
I think a lot of people are thinking that you're going to be on the podcast every week. And then they're going to hate us because you still don't live in Reno. You're just here on an extended period of time.
That's right, yeah.
You actually, in a week or 2 weeks, you go back to Connecticut, right?
Yeah, sorry, guys.
So, but you'll still be on occasionally.
Yeah, I'll be doing some race analysis with Pete.
Uh-huh.
Because that's one of the things we can do remote.
Yep. And then you'll also be joining us occasionally every quarter. So you'll probably be joining us here back in Reno and on the podcast. Anytime Amber's here, she's going to be on the podcast.
That's right.
But do not hate us because that's going to happen. and it's not a gender thing. It's not like we want Amber to be here.
It's Amber's fault.
It's 100%. It is 100% my fault, you guys.
It's true. She didn't
It's true. It's true.
It's actually not Amber's fault. It's her husband's fault because he's got tenure and everything else. That jerk, he did a great job with his career.
So successful.
I know. Gosh darn it. Let's get into his question here. So first of all, that is a lot of stopping.
That's a lot.
It's too much for my taste.
Yeah. John and I just went on a long ride, and I got a Coke and some Nutter Butters at the gas station, and Jonathan very nicely just paced in a little circle while I ate my. Our stop was definitely 10 minutes too long, but I was in trouble, so I needed it. But yeah, John would choose to stop about every. At the beginning and at the end.
Yes, that's usually the best. That's what I like to do. Because of this very reason, stopping is hard.
It's hard.
I should announce something because I don't think I've ever talked about it on the podcast where I Everested before once. Just yes,
what's that?
Believe it or not, yeah.
What is Everesting?
29,029 feet in one ride. Usually people do it when they repeat a climb. However, we did not. You can find out more about that. This is a podcast joke, by the way, because I talk about it too much. But you can just Google Everesting Jonathan Ask a Cycling Coach podcast. You'll find it. But we stopped a lot during that one. And I understand, though, in this case, if you have a lot of riders of various fitness levels or just anything going on, Tim, then you are going to have a lot of stops because people are going to operate at kind of different schedules, so to speak. And we had that when we did that Everesting ride, and it made it so hard, like so much harder. I remember the last 6 times that we stopped, I was like, not getting going again. Like, it's just not happening. I can't do it.
You pulled a lawnmower and nothing happens. Like,
well, we're done. It was just so hard to get started again. Chad actually talked about this on a previous episode, and we'll figure out which episode that was and put it into the forum, so then you can find that. But he actually kind of talked about what gets going, and basically he talked about it. Your body is re-warming up, so to speak. Blood circulation is beginning to happen. Your fibers also you're like one of those efficient engines that can shut down cylinders with your muscle fibers, and as the demand decreases, you don't utilize as much muscle fibers, and there's many muscle fibers. And then as demand increases, you start to bring them on board, but it takes a little while.
Right.
So that feels uncomfortable because you're stressing, less muscle fibers at a greater degree for a short period of time while the other ones start to come on board.
Yep.
Byproduct. And then you also have just the general soreness and fatigue that you feel of your muscles that when you're in motion, you don't feel it as much. Then when you stop, you become more aware of it. And so it is there. There are reasons that it exists. Like Pete said earlier, there's no silver bullet. There's no way to just make it disappear.
Yeah. And this happens to everyone.
Oh yeah.
Honestly, it's not a fitness thing. It's not like, I'm going to get fit to a point where it's not. No, this is just, this happens to everybody. We used to call it the 7-Eleven legs, which it just
makes sense.
Aptly named, huh, Pete?
Maverick legs.
Maverick legs
for me.
Adventure's first stop.
That's right.
Sorry. Yeah.
For what it's worth, when I did do Dirty Kansas, which I think I got 140 miles into it by the time I stopped. So I went through 2 of the checkpoints. I was in and out of the checkpoint the first one I was in and out in under a minute because that was slow because they had to adjust my shifting because I had crashed and bent the derailleur, which they did amazingly well in that. I mean, in under a minute, I went from having 3 or 4 gears to having 10 out of 11. It was still better than 4.
Measurably better.
That was some serious wizardry that they managed there. Yeah. And the second stop, I was in and out in under 30 seconds. And for partly this reason, because it's tempting to want to stop because you're tired and you're like, a break mentally sounds really good, but at what cost? At what cost?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really tough. And so I guess that we should probably the one way you can think of this too, and I think that the way that we answered it in the past with Chad was really interval breaks. It gets harder if it's a longer break to kind of get back into things, and you start to notice it there. But maybe it's best if we all just share how we deal with it. Doesn't necessarily mean we successfully deal with it, just how we deal with it.
Yeah. It's how you wrap your head around. We all feel the same thing, and this is the easiest way for him.
Yeah, it's one of the first things that I think is this is just a feeling, and it's gonna go away.
Yeah,
it's just here for a while, and even when you're 200 miles deep into a ride, I can absolutely testify that it goes away. It does eventually. Sometimes it lingers a little longer, but it's just a feeling. So that's one of the things that I think of. And also, like we said, everybody kind of experiences it, right?
Yeah. I like to go harder.
Yeah.
I mean, to be totally honest, go a little harder for the first 30 seconds when you get back on your bike. I think it shortens the amount of time you feel that way. It still hurts. It hurts a little more, but it goes away faster.
This reminds me of Keegan's logic with long races. The best way to approach a long race is just to go faster because then the race is shorter. So if you don't know, you know.
Now you know.
Now you know. Yeah. If you can't, you don't, right?
Yeah.
So in this case, it's kind of the same thing though, right?
Yeah.
Like it's going to hurt. So if I just push a little harder, it'll hurt for less.
Yeah.
It brings things on board for less time.
Less time.
More hurt, less time.
More hurt, less time. I'm
I'll
okay
take that
with
every
that.
time. Yeah.
Same here.
I wonder, so I don't do this personally, but I wonder if doing that, but at like really low resistance, but super high cadence, would achieve the same thing without really like loading your legs again.
Next time we go for a ride, you do like 150 RPMs for the first 30 seconds, and I'll go hard for the first 30 seconds.
And then we'll see.
We'll see.
Because that's a scientific test.
We're obviously controlling for all of the factors.
Yes.
This is the height of experimental design here.
Sure, exactly.
We're very scientific here.
Yeah. When we were talking about like when you stop in race scenarios, right, for pee breaks and other things like that.
Or taking a lap in a crit.
Yep. Or mechanical or who knows.
So for people who don't know that, there is a rule in criterium racing where if there's a mishap, so if there's a crash and you get caught up in the crash, you can take what's called a free lap, which means you go to the pit, which is just like an area on the course where there's officials and mechanics. You can have your bike serviced if you need to, and then when the race comes around again, you can jump back in the race. And you're only allowed to do that until the last 5 laps of the race, but each race it's a little bit different. But in those cases, I think, and that has definitely happened to me more than once, and I think the adrenaline from the racing kind of masks that sensation. I mean, it's still there and you don't feel awesome. But I think that, I mean, it can also happen for me at the start of a crit too, because you've warmed up, you're super amped, and then there's the staging process. And the staging process is, it's like my least favorite part of bike racing, because when you're in those pro races, they like do call-ups, so they're calling up individual riders one at a time, but you don't want to be at the back of the field when you start, so you have to line up pretty early. And it's this balance. Like, you don't want to be the first one to line up because you don't want to sit there forever.
Yeah.
But you don't want to be the last one either. So anyway, you end up with this significant chunk of time where you're just sitting there waiting for the race to
Listening
start.
to the national anthem on a guitar.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. And
If you're lucky.
Those are the good ones. If you have like any big race, this happens. Like a national championship will definitely happen. If you're doing any sort of like a larger series where they have like a structured call-up thing, it happens a lot.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating a lot of the time because it can be the same thing. Like when you start out from there.
But I kind of, so in the crits, when I'm starting a crit, that's when I pull, the same strategy that Pete does. It's just like, just go hard. And because it's going to be a hard race, you're going to settle into a rhythm. You know that as soon as you settle into that rhythm, it'll be good. So it's almost like just go harder, get into good position. And then that way, by the time you settle into a nicer pace, you're in good position for that. And then you get into the flow of the race.
Yeah.
Yeah, not advisable to groan when the gun goes off. I've heard this. I can think of a couple of race analysis videos that we did this year where, like, when I was watching the video first, we have the audio kind of drop down on the race so you can hear the commentary. But a few of them, like the race organizers say, like, all right, go. And then I'd hear, like, that's not the attitude you want to have. Be excited about the race. And yeah, like I think it's like adrenaline, like you said, can be great to mask it.
Oh yeah.
Honestly, too, another thing, if this is just a social ride, like I find that a lot of the time we compartmentalize the social experience. And as the ride gets longer, social interaction drops.
It's so weird how that
gets
happens.
so quiet, right? And then, like, when you make a stop, sometimes there's a bit more, and then you get back on the bike, and sometimes it stops. So, like, carry the social interaction through a bit if you can. I mean, obviously, don't be the annoying person that's talking somebody's ear off that doesn't want it, but
I've been that person.
Yeah, haven't we all? Yeah. But I think I think that can be a helpful thing too, just a distraction, so to speak.
Yeah.
So it will happen, but Tim, just stop less.
Yeah, but for less long and less often.
Yes.
Yeah.
Those two things
It helps a lot.
helps a lot.
It's funny. So at the end of the racing seasons, often when I was racing full time, we would do fondos and charity rides more towards the end of the season, sponsor appearances. And we always looked forward to them like, oh, it's going to be so nice because we're going to, it's this funny thing. Bike racers like food. And so often now these fondos they do amazing work with the food stops. And it's like, you don't want to miss out. I mean, it's amazing stuff. But then we'll finish what would be a pretty normal distance for us and just be absolutely shattered. And we're like, what happened? It wasn't going hard. It wasn't that much mileage. But it's just like you're stopping and starting and stopping and starting and stopping and starting. And it's surprisingly taxing.
Yeah. Along those lines, I can think, sorry, a quick aside before we get into the last question. the Sagan Dirt Fondo, which is now the Truckee Dirt Fondo.
Yeah.
That one, I think they had like quesadillas.
Yeah, they were delicious.
Yeah.
And margaritas.
It was pretty early in the morning.
It was like, my first quesadilla and margarita was at like 10 a.m.
Yeah. But to your point, they have a really good food. It's pretty sweet.
Yeah.
Nick's question, and then we're going to get into some live questions that you've submitted on YouTube. Says, hey, all, I have a question about multi-day races. I'm a Cat 5, and my A race is a 3-day stage race in late May, comprised of a 38-mile rolling circuit race, a 60-mile road race with varying climbs and a mountaintop finish, and an 11-mile 1% false flat TT. My question is, how should I manage my energy resources in order to maximize my performance? Should I take it easier the first day so I can save for the road race and time trial? Also, since I will undoubtedly be fatigued after the first 2 stages, how should I adjust my power for the TT if I estimate it to take 28 to 30 minutes? I consider my strength to be 1-minute power, but I still want to do well on all aspects of this race. I estimate to be around 280 watts for an FTP at 64 kilograms, so that's 141 pounds. So 4.375 watts per kilogram. That's strong. In a Cat 5 field, you'll be toward the front, most likely, but you never know. There may be like a 7 watt per kilo junior that shows up, and it's just like his presence is regrettable.
Dang.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yes. So he says that's where he anticipates to be by the time May rolls around for the race. First year on Train Road, and love it. So quick aside for this is he's Cat 5. So he's not chasing points, but he's chasing a really good performance in this race, right? Because Cat 5, you just need to complete races and you get points. In this case, he's probably going to get 2 points for this race.
Yeah, 2 mass starts.
He won't get, you don't get points for individual time trials like this. So... So that's out of the way. Instead, we're just talking about a performance. And this one's kind of interesting. So circuit race starts out 38 miles rolling, as then a 60-mile road race the next day with varying climbs and a mountaintop finish. So 11-mile 1% false flat TT is the final one. So that's the sort of TT. I'm going to strangely start with the TT because he said, like, how should I pace with that? When you hear 11-mile 1% like false flat TT at the end of a stage race, Megan, or sorry, forgive me, not Megan. I'm thinking Megan because she was chiming in on this. Amber,
Megan.
Hi, Megan. What do you think? What comes to mind in terms of how we should pace this, considering it's a false flat at the end of?
That's going to be a tough day.
Yeah, right.
Just mentally, it'll be tough, and I think when you're training for, like, if you're training for a TT, like a 1-day TT, the sensations that you'll have on that day are very different than the sensations you'll have at the end of a stage race.
Yes.
And this is where, when you're doing your daily training, being really mindful of the sensations, and I think one of the beautiful benefits of training with power is it helps you to calibrate your own RPE. So understanding, like, what feels like a sustainable effort. Is it actually sustainable? And I mean, there are some efforts that you can do that are extremely hard, like VO2 efforts sometimes. One of the things I'll do if I'm doing a VO2 effort outside, I usually try to find a small climb. And I find, I'll do the effort maybe 3-4 minutes hard, and then I look at where my endpoint is, and then I go back to the start. And when you look at from the start of the effort to the endpoint of the effort, it's a really long way.
Yes.
But you're going really hard. So it's that, I always try to remember keep that in the back of my mind in a race. Like, I can be going that hard, but I know I can hold it at least for that distance. And it's longer than you kind of think. So little things like that, training those, your awareness of those sensations. What do they mean? Reading your body really well. I mean, the art of a TT is getting the most out of your body over a given distance on that day.
Yeah.
Which is really, really hard to train because it's always going to be different. But the way that you do that is tuning into your body and really understanding what those sensations mean for you.
That's how you alter things, right? Like, you can come in with a plan, but then you also have to have that plan ready, and then you have to have RPE, because who knows? You may also come into it and you may feel strangely fresh that day.
Right.
And you may, even though you have a plan of riding at 200 watts, you may be able to ride the thing at 210.
And maybe you feel terrible and you're not hitting your numbers, but neither is anyone else.
Yes.
And you could have a terrible day by the numbers and potentially still win the race.
Yep.
I mean, it's just, it's really, so that's where the RPE comes in and really knowing your body, I think. For this one, so last week and this week, we talked about setting goals. And I think for any type of race like this, you have to figure out what your goal is and then back out your plan. So, starting with the goal and then, okay, in order to achieve that, breaking that down into the smaller things, what are some of the things I can do? And the TT is definitely a key place where you can gain some time on the field. if the GC is your goal.
Yeah, because that's the thing, right? Like, are you just going to get the experience or like exploit a specific strength to try to get a stage win, or are you trying to go for the GC? So like, let's just assume GC is the goal, and this applies to many people listening to this. This is the intent,
Right. Well, and for people who aren't familiar with stage races, just briefly, in a stage race, when we say GC, we mean the general classification. So a stage race is a multi-day race. You usually have different types of races. So you have, like in this case, you'll have a circuit race, road race, TT. They can be 2 days, 3 days, 5 days, up to a grand tour. And the general classification is determined by who completes every distance in the shortest amount of time. And on the mass start days, if you finish with the group, the whole group gets the same time. If you're in a breakaway, then you finish in whatever that time is, less the gap to the field. And then obviously in a TT, it's just your time. So there are some tactics involved in this. So that's the general classification. You can also win a single stage. So you could go for a stage win. And then there are usually some jerseys within there. So there might be a climber's jersey, there might be a sprinter's jersey. So then the cool thing about stage races, I think, is there are a huge number of options for setting goals.
Yeah.
And if you're going for a stage win and you miss it one day, you can go again the next day. If you're going for the general classification, your strategy is going to be a little bit different than going for a stage win, and definitely different than if you're going for the sprinter's jersey versus the climber's jersey. So they're a lot of fun, I think.
Yeah, it's cool. Like the same field can have a ton of different objectives within that field.
Yeah.
So it makes it a more dynamic experience for everybody.
Yeah, a lot of people are racing different races in the
Right.
same race, which is
fun.
exciting.
It's super cool because then if you know, okay, that person's going for the sprinter's jersey, there is a sprint line for points, right before this climb. So I know that person's going to be stringing it out with their team. Hey, get on their wheels, get in good position for the climb if the sprinter's jersey isn't your goal. I mean, so you can actually really learn and see what other people are doing and play off from other people's strategies.
For sure. Let's get into some GC strategy then in this case.
Cool.
In this case, he has a circuit race, a road race, and then a time trial. And I think that you can't, it's the order of the races or the stages definitely matters. And in this case, I feel like you can't just save it for the TT unless you had some extraordinary advantage over everybody else. And at 4.375 watts per kilogram, I don't think that would be the case, especially if 1 minute power is the strength that he has.
Yeah.
So in this case, I don't think Nick can just save it for the T. Because in a lot of stage races, amateur stage races especially, you can kind of do that. Like you can just nail a good TT and then you can just stick with everybody else for the rest of it and then you can win.
Yeah.
But in this case, that could happen. But it's also Cat 5 racing is very unpredictable in terms of the people that are there, the strength that they'll be able to have one day to the next. So it's probably not a scenario where you can just say, save it for the time trial.
Right.
Yeah, and I think this doesn't sound like one of those races where you can just sort of hang out and sit in. And especially starting with a fresh, the first day when everybody's fresh in a rolling circuit race, that's 38 miles, which is like exactly long enough to actually shatter some people.
Yeah.
Like you said, if there's fast people, the fast people are going to race that race like they're there to win.
Yes.
And so paying attention to those people is like number one priority, is figuring out who the fast people are in your stage race.
Yes.
And then sticking with those said fast people.
Yep.
Right.
And then you'll have to kind of like sit back and look like I stick with them whenever I can, and then I need to capitalize on when I can make time gains.
Right. So again, going back to, the goal is GC, which means that your focus is time.
Yep.
So backing out of that goal, then what are the things that you can do to A, not lose time, and B,
Which
gain
is
time,
stick with people.
which is stick with the fast people. So you want to make all of the key selections in the race. And then where is it that you can gain the most time? And I think probably a good rule of thumb in most stage races is you can gain the most time on mountaintop finishes and time trials. Whereas like in a crit, it can be really difficult to create that enough of a separation to gain enough time. So on a mountaintop finish, you can easily put in, if you're a strong climber and you have a strong finish, you're talking minutes.
Yep.
In a crit, it's really hard to get a break up the road that has minutes gap on the field.
Yeah.
So you have to figure out, like to your point, Jonathan, capitalize on those opportunities to gain time. And that has a lot to do with making those key selections and then identifying where do you best use your energy to make those time gains.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's kind of the fun part, especially if you can recon these stages beforehand, that's a huge help.
Oh, yeah.
It's definitely something that I would recommend. So like, let's talk about like the circuit race first. In this case, GC's the goal.
Yeah.
Once again, like you said, Amber and Pete, you have to make the key selections, right? Assess the competition, And then you're probably going to find out, like in this case is the first stage, especially with a race profile like this, you're going to figure out who the competition really is and what their strengths are. And you're going to discover the unfortunate fact about Cat 5 racing is that it's just like, it is a wide range of athletes, and you will have very fast athletes most likely within that group.
Yeah.
So in that case, that's like the circuit race is almost just like stay heads up. In terms of Nick's profile as a rider and everything else, I don't think that's the day where he's probably going to make any time gains necessarily, but that's definitely one where he needs to stay heads up and kind of take everything in.
And like Pete said, that's the day to figure out who your competition is. So if you're staying with the fastest riders, you're not losing time on them. And that's probably the biggest, because the circuit race isn't going to be a good time to gain time. Your focus should be don't lose time.
Yes.
So don't put yourself in a hole that you have to make up for in the coming days.
The road race, I feel like, would be the focus. That's the next day.
I agree.
So in that regard, you definitely, and since it finishes with a mountaintop finish, recon and figure out that finish. And also, don't ride it in just isolation. I remember doing this with my first. It wasn't technically a stage race. Well, it wasn't my first. Yeah, I think it was actually. It was Sea Otter, and it wasn't a stage race, but I was doing the circuit race. I was doing the crit, and I was doing the road race. And I remember like climbing the final road race climb, and all I had time to do was just do that final climb, and it's hard. But I was like, oh, I got this. It's fine. Yeah. And then like,
that's it.
Yeah, it's easy. And then I came into it at the end of the race, and I was like, I don't know if I can make it up this. So
it's really different.
When you analyze it, try to consider the context of the race as well. So know that you're going to be tired. So like if you just found like you could really sprint up that really steep section, that may be the case, but you're going to have to race differently if that's your plan to really just exploit your 1 minute power toward the end. You want to make sure that you are keeping some of that in reserve by trying to ride as efficiently as possible coming into it, right?
Yeah, and I think this is where psychological warfare comes into play.
Yes.
When you're at the end of a race and you're on a climb, it is so hard, and it's so hard for everybody. But, everybody's going to, if they're smart, they're going to be keeping a poker face about it. But if you have a 1 minute power, it doesn't necessarily mean that you just need to make your move 1 minute from the finish. If you made your move 2 minutes from the finish, putting down that power for a minute might be enough just to demoralize everybody who's with you. And if they give up on chasing you, that's all you need. Even if they hesitate to chase you, that's all you need. So, looking at that finish and picking a few points where you think might be a good place to go tactically based on the terrain, it's good to keep those in mind. And then by the time you get there, hopefully you'll have been paying attention in the race and you'll have a good idea of maybe adjusting some of your strategy on the fly based on what you saw in the race.
Yeah, with mountaintop finishes, especially if it's like building up to the steep part for a long time, you cannot get distracted. Once again, thinking back to that Sea Otter race, tons of juniors that are just like insane were in that race. I remember them going by me and I was like, no one has ever climbed that fast, ever. Not today, not in this, like ever. They're the fastest
This is not
people
really happening.
on a bicycle. It was insane. And then 30 seconds later, they were like swerving and like going off the road. So you will see that for sure, because there are 2 points that we basically, when we think bike racing, especially when we start out, we think of two things. We think of sprint finishes and mountaintop finishes, right? So when we're in that moment, we get so excited and
this is it. We're here.
Exactly. I'm a bike racer. And we just go. And that's, you really have to stick to your guns. Stick to that plan that you built in terms of analyzing the finish and where you're going to make your move. But once again, it's key to mark those GC threats. So if they do make a move, you just have to make sure that you're with them and then look for that opportunity to use the strength, which in this case, your 1 minute power. Going into the TT, and then we'll talk about some like recovery stuff and everything else too. But going into the TT, we already talked about this is where RPE comes in, because who knows what the racing has been like the 2 days before. 200 watts might feel really hard now, right? Whereas before it didn't feel that hard. And this is definitely, and I'm just saying 200 watts arbitrarily, so that's not we're not saying this is what you should
as
ride
an
at,
example.
Nick. And then also, this is a key point to understand. Like, this is where your training comes into play. It's like 2 to 3 days deep into a stage race.
Big time.
Because you're kind of brought down. Everyone's freshness is removed, so to speak. So then at that point, your fitness just is what it is. And if it is higher, it will help you.
Yeah.
And so this is why you can kind of come into this with confidence if you've been following a structured plan for this, because you will have a solid backing.
Yeah. And this 1% TT is punishing to people who, if you fall apart, you're going to lose a lot of time.
Yes.
So I would say even err on the side of slightly below your goal pace, because if you do blow up, that 1%, you're gonna drop 5 miles an hour, you know?
Absolute negative split, right?
Absolute negative split.
So like you do not want to do your first half faster than your second half.
Build into it. Yeah.
Yeah, because that will, like, if it was like a 1% downhill one, that might be a bit different, right?
But
this is
we need more of those.
Pete,
Sign me
should
up.
do a time
I'm a
trialist.
time trialist now.
But yeah, just the little bit of grade, 1% is all it takes. If you go over your limits, then it really starts to punish you. You lose a ton of time. So, yeah, those are kind of the main things. We didn't have this in our notes, really. I guess we do kind of have some tips, but on the recovery side, I think that's like the big thing. And Amber, you were a professional stage racer. That was what you did.
That sounds really hard.
Yes, right? Some tips. What would you recommend? First time stage race, most likely, but certainly it's a Cat 5 stage race, so early in a cycling career. Yeah. What would you recommend they do off the bike, outside of it?
Nutrition. So eat enough and eat the right stuff at the right times. And honestly, like one of the rules of thumb during a stage race is just never be hungry. Like, don't, if you finish the stage and you have your recovery shake, which by the way, please do that after every stage. Cause it's really, stage race more than any other, especially more than a 1 day race, like it becomes really important to restore those glycogen stores between stages. Yes. So getting that recovery shake down, after the ride, super, super important. And then, if you have dinner and then you're super hungry half an hour later, have a snack. Like don't stress.
Not the time to diet.
I'm gonna lose some weight tonight.
No, not a good strategy. So the hay is in the barn, guys. The hay is in the barn.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I think always be eating. Always be, really focus on your hydration. Really focus on eating, and then know that during the race, when you're taking on nutrition, it's not just about fueling that day, but you're also fueling for the next day.
Yes.
So, and then the second you cross the finish line is the moment you start preparing for the next stage. Yeah. So everything that you do from the moment you cross the finish line, from your recovery shake to getting out of your chamois quickly. I had some teammates that had this, the rule of thumb for them was you don't actually start recovering until you've taken a shower.
I like that.
Yeah.
That's good.
Which I think there is like a mental component of it that's very true.
It's like switch off when you take the shower.
Yep.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah.
So getting, get yourself out of that race venue, get back to the hotel, get back to wherever it is that you're staying, and like really start calming your system down. That shift from sympathetic to parasympathetic is really, really important.
Can I share something really quick on the nutrition side?
Yes.
Just to make it so that if anybody else has made mistakes like this, we all do them. That same Sea Otter week, things are not going well. I did the road race, and I remember I got dropped by all these like 7 watt per kilo juniors, and I was like, I clearly weigh too much. Like I need to lose weight.
If I can pinpoint one problem here.
That's all it was. So for dinner that night, I had like a seared ahi plate. It was basically just like some arugula. And like when I mean arugula,
6 pieces of arugula.
Yeah. When I mean arugula, I mean like
he left the other 4.
They're like garnishes, and then just like some tuna. And that was like all I ate. And I'm like, I'm going to be so fast tomorrow.
I can't wait for tomorrow.
And I showed up for the circuit race. And I remember after one lap, I was like, what happens? Like, I have nothing in me. So, like, yes, everyone does it. We all make that mistake.
Yeah. Learn from our mistakes.
From us. Make sure this is not the time to be thinking. Also, like, one thing that I find when I'm in a stage race, if I eat to hunger, I don't eat enough. Like, but also to that point, like you said, if you do feel hunger, eat for sure. For me, I always like when I race really hard, my appetite just goes away.
I'm in the same boat.
And so then like, I do a hard race and then I'm trying to recover and like, I know I need to eat and it's hard and I have to, it's not like forcing yourself to eat necessarily. I guess it is in a way.
Start eating and then it helps a little bit. But nothing sounds good. It doesn't sound like you want to eat and you just have to start. Just take
I take my time with it. I don't try to just like shovel it all in and get it over with. I just take my time, kind of always be eating, so to speak, and
have a plan.
Yeah.
Right. Like kind of have an idea of how many gels or packets of blocks or whatever it is that you think that you should want to take in during the race, and then keep track of how much you actually did. Have a plan for, have that recovery shake ready. Know that you're going to take it right after the race, even if your stomach feels crummy. And then know that, okay, I'm going to have a high carbohydrate dinner. And so at least if you don't feel like eating, you're still sticking to a plan that's going to get you enough fuel to get you through the race.
Sure.
And then, if you do get hungry, just eat. Just eat,
sure.
Because you need it during a stage race. You really need it. We would get to a point sometimes, like in the longer stage races, some of did like 10 and 12 day stage races. And by the end, like you
don't want to eat anymore.
And it's always pasta. And it's just like, oh my God, if I have to look at another plate of pasta. I mean, it would get to the point sometimes where I would like go and find little packets of jam to put in my pasta just to make it different because it was, it was really gross.
The things
really
that
gross.
racers do,
But I had, it was really important to get those carbohydrates in. And it was like the last thing I wanted to do was not eat and get on the bike. And, that would be a lot worse than just finding a creative way to make the pasta a little more palatable.
One thing we talked about too is like, if you can grocery shop. So you may have a stage race that makes you move like from one day to the next, or hopefully you have a stage race that doesn't require that. And even if you do, go big in the grocery store the day before. I mean,
the day before.
Yeah, and do not do it the day of. Like, get everything sorted the day before. And when I say go big, I mean, like, when you look at when you stand there and you're like, I mean, bread and bagels, the answer is yes.
Yes.
like, don't think, like, which one should I get? Get everything, because to that point, it's just, like, things don't sound good or you're tired of something.
You're going to want options.
And you're going to want options for sure. So, and get everything that you have there. And even if you can, cook it beforehand. Like, last year when I did the Soho stage race, we went and got a ton of rice, a ton of eggs, ton of chicken, because that was like a really easy, and then like some broccoli and some other stuff like that. But we had our rice and eggs, and we just like cooked up a bunch of it, and then we had a bowl, and we kept that in the fridge because that was like the first thing that when we got back to the house, all 6 of us racers that were in the house, we just started eating that, and it was easy.
Oh yeah, and it's so nice when you don't have to cook.
Yes, so if you can pre-cook, definitely pre-shop. Because it's a pain when you think like, oh, now I have to go to the store to go get X, Y, and Z.
Or go to the restaurant and go sit in the restaurant at a table and order some food.
Yes.
Yeah, not ideal.
That's a terrible idea.
Yes. So, do that for sure. You also mentioned like alarms. Using alarms for it.
So
for the week,
we've talked about this before, but, cognitive load is a big thing when it comes to racing. So to your point, like you don't want to finish the race and feel like, oh, man, I got to go to the grocery store and shop for dinner. Because then you're thinking about like making decisions about what to buy. You're making decisions about what you're going to have to cook for dinner that night. You don't want to have to make decisions during a stage race. So plan it out, plan your meals, do the shopping ahead of time. If you're with a team, or even if you're not with teammates, if you're with a group of people who are sharing maybe an Airbnb or something, do dinners on a rotating schedule. So you plan ahead, what night you're cooking, what you're going to cook, make sure it's something quick and easy. But I really like to use alarms for this stuff. So like I'll set an alarm 3 hours before my race time. That's, eat your pre-race meal. So if that's breakfast, it's breakfast. And then an hour beforehand, start drinking, or whatever the things are that pin your number. What are the things that you need to remember to do leading up to the race and even after the race? And just set alarms on your phone. I'd have like 15 or 20 in a race day sometimes. And it's just great because you don't have to worry about like, oh, I don't want to forget to, get my number, or, have a packing list of stuff that you need to take with you on the day. So again, like you're not mentally going through a checklist. You actually have a checklist and for sure you have everything. You're not second guessing yourself. Just remove all of the decision making that you can. Do it all ahead of time. And then, the alarms are great for that.
Yeah, and one thing to kind of like, it seems a simple tip, but the best way to lay out that alarm schedule is to look at your start time and then just count backwards.
Yeah.
And give yourself a little bit of allowance for everything. And then if you, like, I just do it on my iPhone in the Notes app. I just go, like, start 9 a.m. And then I go, okay, so I'll need to be at the starting line at basically 8:55. So 8:55, be at starting line. And then I think, okay, well, I'm going to need to warm up before the race, so I'll need 5 minutes to go from my warm up to there, and then I add 5 minutes in and I say end warm up and then go to there and then start warm up, and I just step all the way back, and then I have zero stress Like
Yeah.
you combine that with alarms and it's just so nice.
Yep.
And because otherwise you end up, you're like, where's my glove? And then you're like lost and you can't find anything and you're stressed. And, it's a mess. That's the last thing you need in the middle of the stage.
Yeah,
race,
and then
right?
the more you do that, the more you'll develop a pre-race routine, which is really nice because that
Yeah.
takes even more of the load off because you just know like when you get to the race, you're going to do this. And then after you do that, you're going to do this. And it just becomes habit.
Yeah, 100%. And then also sleeping, right?
Oh, huge.
Like you honestly, when you're in the middle of a stage race, if you give yourself as many opportunities to sleep as possible, the best. And that's why I try to bring books instead of my phone during stage races too, because my phone will just endlessly keep me entertained with useless stuff. And a book, I'll read the book and then it doesn't, get me so excited in my head. And then as a result, I can fall asleep a whole lot easier.
Books are still awesome though.
Believe it or not.
And they're usually not about the race.
Yeah.
So on your phone, you can just do race things like in this
Endless loop.
endless loop.
You don't get to leave it.
Yeah, no.
You're always in it,
Yeah.
and it's not. For me, it's not beneficial. Maybe somebody might thrive on that, but I don't.
No,
Yeah.
I'm the same. And then one of the things you had mentioned before, which I think is important, is the sleep during the stage race is a lot less important than the sleep you get leading into the stage race. So if you're one of those people that has a really hard time falling asleep after a tough day on the bike, don't stress about it. Don't add a layer of stress onto, the lack of sleep. Just, you're going to be fine. Like if you slept well, like the 3 or 4 days leading into the race, you're going to be fine.
Yep. Absolutely. Time for some live questions.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. This first one, I don't even want to say this name because I don't know if I'm going to be Bart Simpson or what's going on, but it's from the forum. So as a time-starved rider that has very limited opportunities to take longer distance rides, are there tactics or tips that can help train my ability to eat for long rides while doing shorter sessions? 100%. It's the same thing. So for me, it's making sure that you have enough food coming into it. Yeah. And then when you're on the bike, like you mentioned this last week, Amber, like when you look at your training, you should eat enough coming into it that it's just a normal schedule, like you're fueling your body. And then you should offset your work that you do in your training session with food that you eat on the bike.
Right. So whatever you eat, like before your training and during your training should add up to the amount of calories that you burn during your training. And then you add on to that a recovery shake at the end.
And that's more than you think. If you're doing an hour workout and it's hard, like a lot of sweet spot work or a lot of threshold work or VO2, something like that, that's a lot of calories burned.
You get 500, 800 calories easy.
Yeah. If you're a big person, then you're going to be burning 1,000 and upward.
Yep.
So like trying to take that in is hard, even in that short time frame.
Yeah.
So you'll train yourself with that.
Exactly. Yeah, as soon as you start doing it, you'll be able to feel the difference, and it's just overcoming that like quantity of food that you're actually eating.
Yep. 100%.
And then experimenting, doing this like with consistency, you'll learn what foods work for you and which ones don't.
Yep. Next one from RMS138 says, could you guys and gal, thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
Explain what is meant when you say to train through, in quotes, B and C races. Do you change any workouts for the week, or do you just do everything as planned and ignore the spike in TSS from the race? Always wondered about this. Thanks. So we can probably cover how Plan Builder does this, right?
Yeah.
When we talk about just training through a C race, it's just replacing the workout that you have with a race.
Yep.
Right.
100%.
Even in some cases, if it's like a cyclocross race and you have like a big long tempo day that day, that may mean doing the tempo day on the cyclocross race if it's just like a 45-minute race or something.
Yeah.
It's not throwing your training off for the race. When you get into a B race, we substitute a workout for sure for a B race, but then also we give you the option to add openers, but we give you a day off either beforehand or give you openers the day before, depending on your preference.
Yeah, and I think making the distinction between B and C races is important. You should be doing a lot of C races, not as many B races, and very few A races.
Well, 1 to 2, honestly, in a year.
Yeah, 1 to 2 A races.
I pick 1. Yeah, and I just want to build toward 1.
One's easier for me too, mentally. And then B races, I care quite a bit about a B race.
Yeah.
So if it's something that you're like, I don't know whether it's a B race or not, it's not.
Yeah, for sure.
That's the easy way.
In fact, it's almost like if you're tempted to make this an A race, it's probably a B race.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a good way. And then just train. It's training through means you just continue to race and continue to train, and you don't actually deviate.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think just mentally, I mean, one thing I like to remember is that whether it's an A race, a B race, or a C race, there's a really good chance you're not showing up with 100% on the line.
Sure.
Just it happens.
And nobody else is.
And
too.
nobody else is. Right. Like, it just doesn't happen. So don't let it get in your head that it's a C race. Like, show up on the line and just know that this is bike racing. So you don't have to be the strongest person. You don't have to be at 100%. It doesn't mean that you can't race well. So whether it's A, B, or C, show up to the line and race well. And then the B and C races, in racing through those, you can really use that as a mental practice of, like, you know, getting yourself into a good mental state for that, regardless of what the goal is.
Yep, absolutely. Next one's from Keith. Says, longtime listener, first time caller.
Love line.
Yeah, love line.
Throwbacks.
Stuff, yeah. As a single speed mountain biker and wanting to work in intervals, are hill repeats the equivalent, or should I stick to geared road bikes for high intensity interval training? You can totally do it on your single speed. And as far as like hill repeats being the equivalent, really, like, intervals are much more simple. And I think a lot of people like think they're intervals, then there's like high intensity interval training, and like it's all the same thing. It's structure.
Right.
Yeah.
That's all it is. And like and when we talk about high intensity, that does not mean all out. High intensity could be tempo.
Yeah.
We were just looking at Ryan Standish's day yesterday, where he died 1,000 deaths
He did
from
12
tempo.
10-minute tempo blocks.
Yeah.
Which was a lot.
Yes. Lots of hurt that he was dealing with. So like that was high intensity. I guarantee if you asked Ryan in those moments, like, hey, is this high intensity? He'd be like, please stop talking.
Yeah.
So yeah, high enough. So really, when you're talking about like high intensity interval training or interval training, we're basically talking about the same thing. Some people might draw some sort of differentiation there, but basically it's just structure for your riding.
Yeah.
So hill repeats, yes, can be structure for your riding.
Yeah.
The only time where that gets tricky is if the length or duration of that hill or the conditions of that hill match the conditions that you should be doing for your interval workout.
Yeah, you don't have, with a single speed mountain bike and a hill, there's only one combination.
Yes.
With geared bike, you can turn that hill into a bunch of different, you can differentiate, each gear will be a different pace of climbing the hill.
Right. It'll simulate different gradients almost.
Yeah. And so it'll be different. It could be tempo, where a single speed bike could be all out.
If you're climbing a 10% grade on a single speed bike, good luck doing a tempo interval. It's not going to happen.
Exactly.
Like you have to put out a lot of wattage and whatever. I mean, unless you've got some crazy light gear or something, but in most cases they don't. So So yeah, it's that's kind of where the separation comes from. So yeah, absolutely, Keith, especially if you're following like a structured plan that has intentional structure behind it, so then you're going to have to work at different intensities for different durations. So it's really tough just to let your hills kind of decide and the gearing that you have stuck on your bike to decide. So I'd absolutely recommend having gears to be able to change that around. That's like also another thing why I personally like, I know that there's a lot of liberty taking with saying that like riding a single speed is like so good for you. And while it can teach a lot of really good things, especially momentum preservation, it certainly isn't like a replacement for just good training. You know, it's not like suddenly every ride is a training ride because you're riding that. Separate riding from training. That's like one thing that I've talked about a lot on this podcast. If you separate your rides from training and you're honest with yourself on that, that will be really helpful.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, okay. Let's get back, or let's go into Greg's question. It says, I'm just getting back to train road after a knee injury. What plan do you recommend? Step one, talk to your doctor. Because it really depends on like your unique situation. And I'm sure somebody else is listening to this and like, I just jumped back in. And then another person's like, I had to wait a year. Who knows? So it's going to be different. But we get this question a lot. And basically like the root of the question is, should I train before I train? Right? But chances are your ability is what your ability is. So let's just assume your doctor's giving you a go-ahead to be able to do hard workouts on a bike.
Yeah, hard.
Let's assume that.
Yeah, make sure the doctor says hard workouts are okay.
Yes. Can we make that, once again, let's assume that this is the case. All right? That's our assumption. So if that's the case, then you can do a ramp test.
Yeah.
Because the thing about the ramp test that's so great is you'll just go as hard as you can. It's not like you have to go any harder than you can.
Right.
Yeah.
And then start out with, just go through Plan Builder, set out a goal, whatever that goal is, whether it's a specific event or you just want to train for a specific type of riding. Pick an end date or let Plan Builder just train you through a whole base build specialty cycle, whatever it may be. And then after that, it'll start with a ramp test for you. You'll do that, and then it'll work you in where you're supposed to be.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't think that it's like you necessarily need to do anything. Unless your doctor says, don't start with high intensity, then absolutely don't start with high intensity.
Right.
Yeah.
And take into consideration whatever it is that you've been doing before the injury, right? So if you are really experienced, in terms of like picking the volume and your experience level, which
Yes.
Plan Builder will do for you, but it's also something for you to keep in mind.
I'd suggest, like, if anything, like lowering the volume, right? When you're coming back in.
Err on the side of lower
If in
volume.
doubt, yeah,
Because you should be doing a lot of PT.
right.
So, like, you know, in terms of time that you have.
The thing with injury that's funny is, well, a couple of things. One is when you're injured, you feel like you're never going to be healthy again. And then when you're healthy, you feel like you're never going to be injured again.
So true.
Yeah.
Oh, man, that's true. Yes.
And so when you're actually injured and you feel like you'll never be healthy again, you're just in this mad rush to get back to health and get back to fitness. When in fact, a little bit of patience on the front end of that will accelerate your healing process. So if you start, like Pete said, a little bit err on the side of being conservative, a little bit lower volume to begin with might allow you to heal faster, progress more quickly, and get you back to where you want to be faster. But patience is really the extremely difficult key to all of this.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. Let's go into, Lewis has a question. If I travel a lot for work, or I travel a lot for work, if I have to change my Thursday ride to a Friday and my Tuesday ride to a Monday, resulting in a 4-day block of hard rides, how much fitness am I missing out on? So I assume he's following a low volume plan. Assuming your body can handle the 4 days back to back, you're not missing out on anything. You're still doing the work.
No.
Yeah, and one of those should be easy. So, yeah, try it.
Yeah, that's what I do. I do Monday through Friday, all of my training. And then Saturday is like a bonus day. And I do a mid-volume plan instead of doing a high-volume plan because I know I can tolerate the stress of high volume, but I also know that my life gets in the way a lot of the time, or I let life get in the way of training. So as a result, then I don't hit all my marks. I'd rather hit all my marks in the mid-volume.
Yeah, and that's something everybody should hear and remember is go lower and knock everything out of the park. I guarantee everything is your whole life will be better if you go mid volume instead of high and knock everything out of the park.
More Home Depot then.
More Home Depot and more skiing, right?
More skiing, yeah, exactly.
More happiness.
Yes. Let's get into, I don't know if we want to answer number 18.
No, let's not do
Okay,
it.
that's good. Yeah, good. Okay, let's go into Cameron's question, and then we'll just do a couple more here. It says, question, I'm a 15-year-old cyclist, and I'm hopefully going to nationals. Are there any tips for me? Also, I have a dream to become a professional. Is there something in particular that I should do?
Get a mentor.
Yeah, right. And oh man, a good one. Like, and I know that's kind of hard to probably quantify, but because I see some cyclists mentor young riders, and it just makes me cringe.
Yeah.
Because they're like treating them like they're a masters racer or something, and like we get this question a lot. Like, how do I train my child, or I'm training a group of high schoolers, what do I do? And keep it fun when they're young. Like, you can't just train them like they're a full-on athlete. So if you find a mentor, somebody that knows how to work with kids.
Talk to somebody who's done this. Talk to a former pro. And when you're looking at the potential former pros you could talk to, by the way, most of them are very nice. Look for a former pro who had a long career. Because there are definitely a lot of pros that get in, have meteoric rise, crash and burn, and then they're gone. Yeah. The people who've had long, sustainable careers are the people who probably are going to take a healthier approach. And I think that they would probably have the best lessons for you. So it's unlike other sports where there's sort of a clear pathway to the pro ranks. It's a lot less clear when it comes to road cycling. For guys, I think it's more clear than it is for women. But it really helps just to talk to somebody who has walked that path and know that the other thing is to know there are a million different pathways to get there. You know, you don't have to be a certain personality type. You don't have to be a certain physiology type. There's a lot of different ways that you can reach that kind of a goal. So talking to a few different people about it, I think would be really helpful. But ultimately, one of the best things you can do for yourself is to develop a village around yourself of people that you really trust who genuinely have your best interest in mind. Yeah. So that's a coach, that could be your parents, that could be fellow athletes, that could be your mentor. But find people who really have your best interest as a human being in mind, not just as an athlete. Because sometimes those two things are at odds.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's the one thing to capitalize on is as a 15-year-old already going to nationals, you're doing fine.
Yeah.
You're
fine. You're
don't
good.
worry. Still have fun, still do normal things.
Try everything.
Try everything. You'll you have the amount of time left where if you are amazing and you want to be a pro, you'll get there.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
You're not starting too late. So you can still go hang out with your friends. You can still skip a bike race every once in a while. It's not the end all be all. Remember that there's the rest of everything, and that will in turn make you a more like sought after pro, which I think is actually coming around. You need to be a well-balanced person to be a pro now.
Yeah.
You
where
really do.
You didn't used to have to be.
I've never looked at this with cycling, but I know that like the other sports that I like skiing, motocross, and I've certainly seen this in football and other things. There tends to be the bell curve is kind of pointy in terms of career lifespan. And the interesting thing is that it's not necessarily because people ran out of time. Like if people are 15 and they start at 15, that career lifespan, let's just say it's 10 years, it tends to carry them to 25. Whereas a person, if they start at 20, it carries them to 30. Like certain sports tend to have like a certain window. So there's a pressure for young athletes because they are 15. And then there's a 15-year-old that just gets signed by Trek, right?
Right.
And they're like brought up and they're like, I'm missing out. I'm doing something wrong. And as a result, I'm behind the bell curve. But that's absolutely what you shouldn't feel. Don't worry if that's the case.
Yeah.
And man, with NICA and everything else, as good as it is, like it's so serious, and there's so much of like a whole like industry wrapped around like developing these kids, which is great. But then on the other side of it, it makes a lot of kids feel like a lot of pressure and like they aren't moving forward. And I see it. And in this case, if you do find yourself in that situation, somebody else feels like they're getting the meteoric rise that you're not, but you do plan on being a professional, don't worry. Let's assume it's 10 years. Your 10 years is going to come a bit later when you're wiser, when you have more to work with.
And you know exactly what you want out of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So don't rush into it. Once again, I'm bringing up Keegan, but he's a good example of somebody that just like he's doing Nordic skiing or alpine skiing. He was doing tons of different things all the time growing up as a kid. He wasn't just like locked into one and then just like on a track. And it's taken longer for him than it has taken for other people.
I didn't even start racing bikes until I was 24.
You're a great example of it.
When I was 14, so I wasn't 15, but when I was 14, I was actually in France. I was visiting a pen pal, and the Tour de France, actually, the final stage of the tour, like went past the front of her house. Yeah. So the whole village came out, right? And everybody was like, oh, the race is coming through. And we're standing in front of her house, and the peloton goes by and they're pointing at the yellow jersey like, oh, he's the winner. And I was like, y'all are a bunch of idiots. The race is obviously not over. Like, how can you even know that this person won?
This bike racing thing is weird. Who would do it?
Weird. So like, that's how much I knew about bike racing when I was your age.
Yeah.
And I still managed to have a 12-year career as a pro.
Yep.
So you have so much time. It's great that you have this passion for it now. Just continue to nurture that passion and protect it, because you know, there are going to be a lot of people who have a lot of opinions about what you should do and how you should do it. The internet's chock full of those. So again, like finding a handful of people that you can really trust and depend on to be honest with you and have your best interests in mind will be really, really huge in carrying you forward.
For sure. I lied. There is one more question. We're going long today, but there is one more question that we need to handle.
It's so much fun.
Yeah. This one says, Amber, for women racers, what do you recommend in terms of building race skills, strength, and tactics when women field sizes are usually small? Mm-hmm. Would you race with the men or just work within the small fields of women racers?
First thing I would say is encourage more women to come out. And I know, that's kind of a tall ask, but I mean, that's a great place to start. If you know other women who ride, or reach out to more women in the community, encourage them to come out. I'm going to give a shout out to my friends Kim and Laura out in Connecticut. They've been doing this the last couple years, and they've been doing an incredible job of encouraging. They've got a Facebook page together. They've reached out to a lot of the women in Connecticut, and they're just encouraging. They're working with race promoters to give discounts on race registrations, especially for first-time riders. So there's a lot of things that you can do within the community to build those fields up. So first of all, I wouldn't just... Yes, the fields tend to be smaller, but don't give up on that aspect of it yet. And you can absolutely hone tactics even in a small field size. And sometimes it's actually a little bit easier. There's less cognitive load, and you can focus on certain skills, certain process goals a little bit easier. She asks, would you race with the men or just work the small fields? You can do both.
Yeah,
you can do both.
I've seen lots of athletes do that. Both. I mean, we have two pro cyclists here. So we have Caitlin Bernstein and then Carolyn Nolan, and both of them are they race with the women and then they race with the men. And it's funny too because like they show up and they smack a lot of the dudes after just finishing the women's race, which is really cool. And I've seen that used a lot.
Yeah,
more
and
racing
honestly,
opportunity.
It's great. It's more racing opportunity. I think the thing to keep in mind is the tactics will be different. The tactics in the women's races are very different than the men's races. That's okay because you learn something from all of it. And then since the men's fields tend to be bigger, and if you're racing with some of the masters fields or like Cat 3 fields, if they're a little bit faster than the women's fields or just more numerous, it's actually really awesome to practice positioning. It's really awesome to practice moving through the field, and those are great races to practice process goals. So, I would, do both if you can fit it into a day. And again, going back, like I love criteriums for this because you can do more than one race in a day. It's a little microcosm of racing, so you learn a lot tactically in a very short amount of time, and you can do more of those races and learn more. And find a group, whether it's women or men or, other people in your field or not in your field, to talk to and debrief after the races so that you really get the most learning out of each experience that you can. I think those would be, that pretty much covers it.
Cool. Thanks, Amber.
Yeah.
Thanks, Pete.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
It's been a fun podcast. And a different departure for it. We'll have Nate back, I think, next week. And then Chad most likely back as well. And Amber, you're still here next week?
I'm here next week.
Yes. Cool.
I'll be here too.
Sorry, Pete.
We love you, Pete.
We just don't have a big enough table. Oh, man. So thanks for joining us, everybody. And remember, if you enjoy the podcast, you can share it with people, and that helps us a ton. You can leave reviews at trainerroad.com/reviews, and you can check out Trainer Road, especially Plan Builder. Build your season now. It'll pick up from where you're at. If you're already following a training plan, or if you're brand new to Trainer Road, it'll just start you off, take into consideration your strengths and abilities, and build you out. You should definitely give it a shot. It'll make you faster, and we'll talk to you all next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.